Hello, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Zack Bowen and Addie Hall. Zack Bowen is a cheerful, confident, and friendly young man. In the summer of 1995, Zack took a short trip to the United States with his father. They arrived in New Orleans, Louisiana, where they planned to stay for a short time. Zack's father eventually decided to leave, but Zack wanted to stay because he had fallen in love with the city at first sight. He found a job at a bar and began to establish his life there. Soon, Zack met Lana, a dancer from Texas. She was sociable, cheerful, and somewhat carefree, which matched Zack's personality. They developed feelings for each other and started dating. Their relationship progressed rapidly, and Lana eventually discovered she was pregnant. At the time, Zack was just 18 while Lana was 28. Concerned about their age difference, Lana considered ending the relationship, but ultimately decided she wanted to keep the baby. Although she didn't want to pressure Zack into becoming a father, he expressed his desire to start a family with her. Lana faced a tough decision about continuing the relationship. She worried that Zack might not be ready to be a husband and father, despite his genuine love for her. While she had feelings for him, she recognized that their relationship could face challenges in the future. Zack had initially come to New Orleans to pursue an education and become an English teacher, but ultimately, he chose to prioritize his family, and they got married. After some time, Lana became pregnant again, which meant the family now had 2 children. Zack, the young father, urgently needed a better-paying job. Unfortunately, there were no suitable opportunities in the city, especially given Zack's limited education. He only had a high school diploma. As a result, he decided to enlist in the army, which took him to Iraq. There, Zack faced a hostile environment that was drastically different from his family life in New Orleans. He was constantly aware that danger lurked around every corner, with stray bullets and the threat of death. Military life was tough, and Zack lost several close friends during his service. He became determined to fail health and fitness tests so he could return home to his family and Lana, his sick wife, who had been diagnosed with hepatitis C and was in poor condition. His plan succeeded, and he returned home, but he lost all the benefits of military service in the process. This left him with psychological trauma as he transitioned back to civilian life. Despite his struggles, he never complained and was reluctant to discuss his experiences in Iraq. Any questions about that time plunged him into deep sadness. Lana quickly noticed that he had become emotionally distant and cold. It seemed that his love for her and their children had faded since he left for military service. Initially, Lana attempted to reconnect with Zack, but soon realized her efforts were in vain. Eventually, she decided to end her relationship with him. Later, Lana confessed that she no longer viewed him as the man she had married. When they got married, she was unaware of the heavy responsibilities Zack carried. At 27, Zack, the former military man, became single again. He gained custody of their children in New Orleans and found a job at a bar in the French Quarter. There, Zack quickly became popular, especially among the female customers, thanks to his exceptional cocktail-making skills and ability to engage with clients. He was seen as an attractive and intelligent man who knew how to charm women. At the bar, Zack met his colleague Addie Hall. She was quite different from him, aligning more with a hip ideology. Initially, she didn't take Zack seriously. However, Zack was very interested in her. Winning her over proved challenging, as she was not the easiest person to court. However, Zack is determined to win her heart. During this time, Addie worked as a bartender, and they began to communicate more. Gradually, Zack managed to capture her interest, and they grew closer. A week before Hurricane Katrina made landfall near New Orleans, they started dating. Zack shared many things about himself, but kept a significant secret. He had a wife and 2 children. As the hurricane intensified in the Gulf of Mexico, Addie discovered the truth about Zack's hidden life, and she was devastated. To make matters worse, Zack's ex-wife, Lana, reached out for help as she faced difficulties on the coast. With the storm causing closures everywhere, Lana was stranded with her two small children, without a job or a car, and turned to Zack as her only option to resolve her problems. Of course, this was not what Addie had planned. She did not want Zack to leave during the storm. Although it was a matter concerning his children, she feared that he might return to Lana, which could jeopardize their relationship. In a fit of anger, she caused a huge scandal, prompting Zack to decide to stay with her. This decision infuriated Lana, especially since they were all stuck in his apartment in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. They ignored the mandatory evacuation order, convinced they could withstand the storm. As Hurricane Katrina approached, they watched news updates until the power went out. They soon realized the immense power of nature, as this hurricane became the most destructive in U.S. history. Winds reached speeds of up to 200 km/h, demolishing everything in their path. Addie listened to the terrifying howl of the wind. Luckily, she was unharmed by the storm, but many of the homes around her had been destroyed. More than 80% of the city was underwater. At this point, Lana tried to contact Zack but was unable to get through. She feared that he might not have survived the hurricane, but she had no way to confirm that. Fortunately, he was safe. Most of the French Quarter was largely intact, aside from some fallen trees, broken signs, and scattered debris. Zack and Addie's apartment astonishingly weathered the storm, which both of them viewed as a miracle. They saw it as a sign that their love would only grow stronger after the storm passed. They joined efforts with other survivors to help rebuild. They cleared away fallen trees in the French Quarter and prepared meals for those in need. They even organized small gatherings on the street. With plenty to drink, they helped form a close-knit group of survivors who looked up to Zack and Addie as guiding lights. For them, Zack and Addie's experience felt like a series of romantic adventures amidst the ruins of New Orleans. However, unbeknownst to them, they were blissfully unaware of how quickly happiness can fade. The destruction was so extensive that government agencies took a long time to gather information about the survivors. For a significant period, they couldn't reach the survivors, who had to fend for themselves. Addie's loved ones and Lana were unable to contact them for weeks and feared the worst. Eventually, rescuers arrived, accompanied by a film crew that documented the situation. Zack and Addie quickly became well known in the French Quarter, with Addie even appearing on the cover of the New York Times. Not only did they help many people escape from the rubble, but they also provided support to others, assisting them in coping with the aftermath of the storm. Zack and Addie had the chance to reach out to their family members. Zack's first call was to his mother. Despite the destruction around them, both he and his mother felt surprisingly upbeat and even enjoyed the atmosphere. Their loved ones were happy that everything was okay. However, this was not the case for Lana, Zack's ex-wife, who was still grieving the near loss of him. Almost a month has passed, but Lana still hasn't heard from him. Then, unexpectedly, Lana saw a magazine cover featuring Zack happily grilling with his new girlfriend, Addie. This infuriated her. While she had been anxious and unable to reach him, he seemed to be living a carefree life. Compounding her frustration, she was unemployed and struggling to pay her bills. She felt personally insulted by Zack's actions and was taken aback by how unconcerned he appeared. Eventually, as the city began to recover and restore its electricity and communication systems, Lana managed to contact Zack. They arranged to meet at a bar in the French Quarter where he worked, and Addie joined them for the reunion. Lana insisted that it was time for him to pay his bills and support his children. She expected him to provide full support. Meanwhile, Addie felt jealous watching Lana take charge and boss everyone around. At that moment, Zack and Addie's seemingly perfect life began to fall apart. The once famous couple now found themselves as just two ordinary residents of New Orleans, needing to return to work and fulfill their responsibilities. No one seemed to remember the contributions they had made to the city's recovery. After the hurricane, Zack and Addie, the once cheerful and active couple, started to spiral downwards. They turned to alcohol and banned substances. Almost all their earnings went toward these vices, leaving them with barely enough to cover rent, food, or bills. The situation worsened as Zack earned too little to meet his own needs, let alone support his children or Addie. The effects of traumatic brain injury, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder from military service became increasingly evident for Zack. One of the most painful experiences he faced during his time in Iraq was the tragic death of a family. He had formed a friendship with an Iraqi boy and had even helped the boy's mother navigate through city checkpoints. Unfortunately, when insurgents learned of this, they killed the entire family, including the boy. Zack felt immense guilt over the child's death, believing he was responsible for the horrific act, and he struggled to forgive himself. These painful memories kept replaying in his mind, and he suffered from depression, but never sought help from professionals. After returning home, Zack appeared cheerful and happy, but this was only a facade. His girlfriend Addie was aware of his struggles but didn't grasp their severity. Instead of seeking help or confiding in loved ones, Zack tried to cope with his grief through alcohol and banned substances. Recent incidents had intensified his difficulties. He felt overwhelmed by pressure from various sources, especially due to Addie's popularity. Addie worked as a bartender, and the attention she received from customers made Zack increasingly jealous. He often lashed out at her, accusing her of flirting with the men at the bar. Addie explained that her friendly demeanor was essential for earning good tips, which they needed to make ends meet. In reality, she had always relied on this approach, as friendly staff typically earn more. Before the hurricane hit New Orleans, the situation didn't seem so troubling. However, as other problems piled up, Zack began to react more intensely to everything around him. Addie believed that Zack's aggressive and angry behavior was due to his use of banned substances. He abused strong stimulants, and the combination with alcohol made his behavior unpredictable. Additionally, Addie was dealing with her own mental health issues, specifically bipolar disorder, and she often neglected her medication. This contributed to her own outbursts of anger, which led to frequent arguments between them. In retaliation, Zack began to frequently disappear at night. This made her jealous and made her realize that he was doing it on purpose. She even threatened to break up with him. Eventually, all this tension led to an argument that ended in a fight, during which Zack hit Addie for the first time. The day after, Zack bought a ticket to Washington. He informed his friends and family that he had broken up with Addie and was ready to start a new life in a new state. However, he did not tell Addie this. One fine morning, she discovered a note on her pillow, announcing that he had left the city forever. That same morning, Addie's co-workers noticed her bruises. She admitted that they were caused by Zack, who had now vanished. Despite this, she didn't seem angry with him and appeared to be quite sad about their breakup. Their story, however, was not yet finished. Within the first week, Zack began telling his friends how much he was drawn to New Orleans and to Addie. He realized that he loved her very much. The two of them frequently spoke on the phone and agreed they couldn't imagine living without each other. It wasn't long before Zack decided to return to New Orleans once more. Unfortunately, Zack and Addie's life showed no signs of improvement. They began drinking heavily and using banned substances, which led to increasingly aggressive behavior in their relationship. They started to provoke fights in front of their friends, causing them to socialize less. No one wanted to be around them due to their erratic behavior. Zack often returned home with injuries, while Addie faced criticism at work for her appearance, as she looked like an alcoholic. Many in their group of friends witnessed Zack and Addie criticizing each other harshly, but they would reconcile the next day. Gradually, people began to disregard their threats. Besides, conflicts between the two became more common, causing resentment among the neighbors. One evening, Addie kicked Zack out of their apartment. He knocked on the door for hours, demanding to be let back in. The other residents were fed up with the noise and called the police. Although Zack eventually calmed down, this incident did little to improve their already strained relationship. They were about to break up because Zack decided to move away again. Financially, he was doing well, working long hours at the bar and earning good tips. He even managed to make an advance payment for a small studio apartment near the French Quarter. However, Addie's actions derailed his plans. She reported him to the police, accusing him of domestic violence. Although he had already agreed to move, she also informed the new landlord, who then refused to rent to him because of the accusation. Meanwhile, Addie threw all of Zack's belongings outside the door. She aimed to hurt him further by calling him a bad father and a failure. This caused Zack to fall into a miserable state, leading to a sad end. In a fit of rage, he burst into the apartment and began to strangle Addie, not stopping until she was unresponsive. After realizing what he had done, Zack faced a dilemma. Should he hide or turn himself in? Dark thoughts crossed his mind, including the idea of ending his own life. Instead, he retrieved Addie's notebook and began to write a detailed account of what had happened. He described how Addie had tried to kick him out, how their argument escalated into a physical confrontation, and how her hurtful words made him lose control. During this time, Zack was using numerous hard-banned substances and seemed to be in an altered state of mind. He shared his feelings, stating that he still loved Addie, even though she was lying dead on the floor. For the next several days, co-workers were surprised that Zack and Addie didn't show up for work. Friends and neighbors noticed that they had become unusually quiet. The arguments and screams had stopped. Over time, Addie's body began to decompose quickly, resulting in a foul odor. Despite consistently being under the influence of a banned substance, Zack realized he had to take action. He lowered the apartment temperature as much as possible, using the air conditioning, and placed Addie's body in the bathtub filled with cold water to slow down the decomposition. Meanwhile, all of this was detailed in Addie's diary. After that, Zack decided to resolve his issues with his employer. He explained that Addie had left for North Carolina and that they had broken up. He requested a few days off to clear his head, and his boss understood his need for time away. In the days that followed, Zack spent time with friends and acquaintances, but they noticed he looked worse each day. He appeared unshaven and neglected his appearance. While Zack attributed his decline to the emotional toll of the breakup, he continued to share stories about Addie moving to North Carolina. During this time, several people grew concerned, sensing something was off, but nobody alerted the police. Everyone knew Addie had a free-spirited personality, so her sudden move was not too surprising. Zack spent the next few days engaging in self-destructive behavior, drinking, using banned substances, and engaging in unhealthy intimate relationship. He eventually called Lana and suggested they meet up for old time's sake. Lana quickly recognized that her ex-husband was not in a good state of mind and declined the invitation. She tried to confirm whether Addie had really gone to North Carolina, but Zack insisted that Addie had. This was the last time they spoke before he vanished and cut off all communication. During this time, Zack experienced severe psychosis. He harmed himself and burned a mark for each year of his life, totaling 28 burns. He stopped answering calls and missed work for several weeks, even though his vacation had ended a long time ago. Lana and her mother were deeply worried about him. They received no updates on Zack and feared the worst. Unexpectedly, Zack replied to Lana's message. He revealed that he planned to go to a club that evening to have a good time. He brought a large bag of banned substances with him to a strip club, where he enjoyed himself with the dancers and appeared to be in a cheerful mood. Throughout the night, he used banned substances, drank heavily, and eventually returned to the apartment where Addie's body remained. His diary entries from this time indicate that he was spiraling into madness. He used spray paint to cover the apartment walls with his thoughts. He created a list of things he felt he had failed at in life, including friendships, work, his time in the army, and his relationship with Lana. He felt he had lost love and, most painfully, had destroyed even the most precious thing left in his life, Addie's body. In his diary, he detailed why he believed everything was ruined and the circumstances that led to these feelings. 12 days after the murder, Zack visited a local bar in the French Quarter. He ordered several drinks and then took them up to the roof. The bartenders grew concerned that he might not pay for his drinks, and their suspicions turned out to be correct. A short time later, Zack jumped off the roof and died from the fall. When the police arrived, they found a note in his pocket. In it, Zack admitted to killing Addie and expressed that he was choosing to end his own life. He believed this was the only way to atone for his mistakes. He provided the address where he lived with Addie and mentioned that the police would find her body inside, along with a diary containing a detailed confession and an account of his last days. In the apartment, the police were confronted with a shocking scene. The first thing that struck them was the overwhelming sense of despair that filled the space. The walls were covered with Zack's writings, where he expressed his self-blame and pleaded for help, leaving behind haunting messages. Unfortunately, no one could hear his silent cries for assistance. The police immediately noticed the cold temperature and the absence of any foul odor in the apartment. There were no signs of decomposition or blood in the bathroom. However, a horrifying discovery awaited them in the kitchen. They found various parts of Addie's body, which had been handled by Zack. Addie's body was discovered in a large black garbage bag inside a refrigerator. When Lana was informed, she was devastated to learn about the terrible crime committed by Zack, especially when she found out that he had died as well. Lana broke down in tears during the phone call. In Addie's diary, Zack clearly describes his actions and thoughts in the days before his death, when his mind was in turmoil. He confessed that her body odor was getting stronger, which prompted him to make the decision to handle the body to prevent further decomposition. It seems he was desperately trying to address the issue of decomposition in a horrific manner. This case shocked the entire city of New Orleans. People were particularly disturbed to learn that Zack, a man who had once been a hero helping to rebuild after Hurricane Katrina, had become a killer. Many were taken aback by the disturbing details of the crime. Forensic experts examined the situation and concluded that Zack had succumbed to a mental breakdown due to several factors. He struggled with post-traumatic stress disorder, which worsened due to alcohol and substance abuse. Zack felt responsible for his life's failures. He couldn't establish a career, maintain relationships with his children, and lost Lana and his friends. Tragically, he also killed his girlfriend, Addie. Constantly burdened by his circumstances, Zack carried an overwhelming weight from his time in the armed forces that he couldn't share with anyone. The case of Zack Bowen highlights the devastating impact of war experiences and emphasizes the importance of seeking support and professional help. If Zack had received the assistance he needed, the story of Zack and Addie, who both survived Hurricane Katrina, might have turned out very differently. Residents of nearby apartments reported experiencing strange occurrences. They claimed to hear voices and see apparitions near the crime scene. At one point, they even organized tours of the area. On January 17, 1999, a man called 911 to report that he had found a woman unresponsive in her home. He was a friend of the victim, Miriam Illes, and had gone to check on her because she hadn't been answering his calls. When he arrived at her house, he discovered that it was locked and none of the doors would open. Looking through a window, he saw Miriam lying on the kitchen floor, clearly deceased. When the police arrived and entered the house, they found that she had been attacked in the back, specifically targeting her heart area. Investigators spoke with the man who called 911, who provided details about Miriam. She was a homemaker and had previously worked in the medical field. Miriam was active in her local community, and her friends were worried about her that day because she hadn't attended Sunday school. She was well-liked and devoted mother to a young boy, Richie. Everyone who knew her believed she had no enemies, which made her death in her locked kitchen even more perplexing. Determining Miriam's time of death was crucial, but without witnesses, the exact timing was uncertain. Police officers meticulously searched the crime scene for evidence, noting that the house appeared undisturbed and showed no signs of forced entry. All external doors to the house and garage were locked when Miriam's body was found. A telephone receiver lay near her hand, suggesting that she may have been on the phone when she was attacked, potentially catching her off guard and leaving her unaware of her attacker. Investigators also requested a report from the phone company to find out about Miriam's recent calls. While examining the crime scene to determine how the attacker entered and exited the house, detectives made a significant discovery. They found a bullet hole in a double-glazed window located just above the kitchen sink. This indicated that the person who shot Miriam was positioned outside. It appeared that Miriam had been standing, leaning against the sink, talking on the phone when she was shot. This single bullet became the key piece of evidence. Tracing the bullet's path, investigators followed it to a creek bed behind Miriam's house. As the investigation progressed, the forensics team found footprints left by size 14 Reebok basketball shoes. The placement of the tracks suggested that someone had taken a shooting stance next to a tree located right behind the kitchen window. The detectives also found a cigarette butt at the shooting site. Further searching revealed a homemade silencer, leading investigators to conclude that the crime was premeditated. The attacker had been hiding behind the tree, waiting for the right moment, smoking a cigarette, and seemed to act with intent. However, the motive behind the crime remained unclear. It did not appear that Miriam was involved in any illegal activities or taking risks that would endanger her. Investigators aimed to gather more information from Miriam's husband, Richard Illes, who arrived at the crime scene while they were there. Richard was a well-known cardiothoracic surgeon at Williamsport Hospital and had saved many lives. He met Miriam in the early 90s while serving as a resident at St. Louis Medical Center, where she worked as a surgical assistant. After marrying, they had a son named Richie and moved to Williamsport, where they both worked together. Miriam was active in her community, engaging in volunteer work at the symphony and church. Her vibrant personality made her well-liked among friends. Despite their wealth and status, Miriam's friends described her as down-to-earth, noting that they were among the richest people in Williamsport. Then she decided to become a stay-at-home mom, quitting her job when Richie was 2 years old and never returning to work. When Miriam was murdered in her own home, Richard became a primary focus for investigators. He told them that the last time he saw Miriam was 2 days earlier, on Friday, January 15, 1999, around 5 p.m., when he visited her before planning to travel to Chester County, Pennsylvania, to visit family. Detectives soon learned that Miriam and Richard had recently separated after 8 years of marriage, with Miriam moving out of their family home to the house where she was later found dead. She had primary custody of their son, Richie, while Richard visited the boy every weekend. Their ongoing divorce raised potential motives, prompting investigators to closely examine their relationship. Richard's behavior struck detectives as unusual. The first question he asked upon learning of Miriam's death was about the evidence that had been found, which seemed odd for someone who had just learned that his wife of 8 years and the mother of his child was dead. Additionally, Richard made an intriguing confession. He was familiar with firearms, having participated in hunting and owned guns, a common practice in the area. There was nothing particularly unusual about this admission. Investigators examined Richard's firearms to check for any connections to the crime scene. They determined that the bullet that killed Miriam was a .22 caliber, indicating the type of weapon they needed to find. Richard had several .22 caliber rifles, which the police confiscated for analysis. He became the primary suspect due to having a motive, access to weapons, and the skills necessary to commit the crime. The intense emotions in romantic relationships can shift from love to hate, which could have played a role in Miriam's death. While the weapon was being analyzed in the forensic lab, investigators looked further into Richard's personal life. As a cardiothoracic surgeon, he had a high income, but he was also paying a significant amount in child support, around $112,000 a month. This financial burden could have motivated him to want his wife dead. Investigators sought to clarify Richard's whereabouts at the time Miriam was attacked. Although Richard was supposed to pick up his son Richie that Friday evening, he opted to spend the weekend with his sister, who lived 2.5 hours away in Honeybrook, Pennsylvania. He had a witness, Nancy Mitch, who could confirm the start of his trip. Nancy informed the investigators that she was with Miriam when Miriam handed over her son, Richie, to Richard. He picked up Richie around 5 p.m., and after Nancy left, Miriam seemed to be fine. The last confirmed sighting of Miriam was around 6 p.m. on Friday, January 15th. The police established that Richard took Richie from Miriam's home and left while Miriam stayed behind, and everything seemed normal. Richard told investigators that he made a quick stop before going to his sister's house. He first stopped at his own home around 9:30 p.m. and then traveled toward southeastern Pennsylvania. He stated that they reached Lewisburg and stopped at a fast food restaurant around 10 p.m. due to bad weather that evening. He called his sister at 11:24 p.m. to inform her that they would spend the night near Harrisburg. Nancy confirmed part of Richard's alibi, prompting detectives to verify the rest of his statements. They checked Richard's cell phone records, which confirmed his call to his sister. He also had a hotel receipt from the Harrisburg area, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. This corroborated Richard's account, indicating that he could not have been at the crime scene when Miriam was attacked. An examination of Richard's rifles showed that none matched the murder weapon, and the silencer found at the crime scene did not fit any of his rifles either. Furthermore, DNA samples from the silencer and a cigarette but did not match Richard's DNA. As the investigation progressed, police discovered that Richard had been having an affair with Catherine Swoyer, a colleague at Williamsport Hospital, which contributed to his separation from Miriam. His relationship with Miriam had begun similarly. He worked with her, they formed a bond, and eventually got married. A similar pattern occurred with Catherine. She worked with Richard, leading to their affair. This information led investigators to consider a possible love triangle. Catherine might have had a motive to kill Miriam in order to eliminate any chance of Richard reconciling with his wife. Jealousy can often drive people to commit terrible acts, but there were additional factors at play. In the event of a divorce, Richard and Miriam would need to divide their assets and finances. Furthermore, if they divorce, Richie is likely to stay with Miriam, which would require Richard to pay child support. Therefore, Miriam's death could be advantageous for both Richard and Catherine. Detectives aimed to determine Catherine's whereabouts at the time of Miriam's death. If Richard had left town to visit family, it would have given Catherine the opportunity to commit the murder. However, investigators confirmed that Catherine was out of town visiting relatives and could not have been involved in the crime. This left the police without any other suspects, as both Richard and Catherine had alibis. Then, an unexpected development emerged when a person claiming to be the murderer contacted the detectives by sending letters to the police station. The first anonymous letter stated that the writer was responsible for Miriam's murder. Detectives were perplexed, as this was an unusual occurrence. Initially, they suspected it might be a prank, possibly from teenagers or someone loosely connected to the case. The writer referred to himself as a soldier of God and a soldier of death, claiming that Miriam was a bad and immoral person. The letter was both confusing and unsettling. Despite attempts to make contact, the writer took great care to hide his identity. The letters were examined for fingerprints, but none were found. They were handwritten in block letters with a pencil, making it difficult for police to analyze the handwriting. While investigators were trying to make sense of the first letter, a second letter arrived, written in a different style and showing signs of arrogance and intellectual superiority. This new letter pointed to a potential suspect, as the author mentioned having multiple academic degrees, suggesting that the crime could have been committed by someone connected to Richard's professional circle. Investigators identified Dr. Ench Zama, Richard's close friend, as the most likely suspect. Zama was described as a tall man, likely with large feet, possibly in size 14. He became a key focus for investigators regarding the anonymous letters. During questioning, he examined both letters and suggested that someone might be trying to frame him. He denied any involvement in Miriam's death and claimed he was with friends at the time of the crime. The investigators verified his alibi and confirmed that he could not have attacked Miriam. The anonymous letters were also analyzed for DNA, revealing a black hair on the sealed flap of one envelope. The DNA did not match Sama or any other samples from the crime scene. This led investigators to suspect that someone was deliberately trying to mislead them. It seemed the letter writer had taken great care to hide their identity, but did they accidentally leave behind a hair? Investigators theorized that the hair was intentionally included to confuse them, as it belonged to someone unrelated to the case. They began to suspect that false evidence had been planted. The silencer with DNA, the cigarette butt, and the letters all suggested a deliberate effort to mislead the investigation. Investigators ended up with 4 DNA samples, each belonging to different individuals. The perpetrator had cleverly planted false evidence, hoping to mislead the police and hinder the investigation. However, investigators received the crucial information they had been waiting for since the first day of the investigation, when Miriam's body was discovered. Near her body, they found a phone receiver. Upon reviewing the phone records, they learned that Miriam had been on a call with a friend throughout the evening. When detectives met with this friend, she recounted that during their conversation, she heard glass breaking and then heard Miriam exclaim, "Oh my God." After that, she heard nothing more and hung up. When she called back, she received a busy signal, leading her to assume that the call had been disconnected and that Miriam was talking to someone else. This piece of information provided detectives with the key detail they had been missing. The call ended at 10:37 p.m., which corresponded exactly with the time of Miriam's death. This was significant for the investigation. With the established time of death, detectives revisited the alibis of all potential suspects. Richard's alibi appeared less credible. Initially, he claimed to have been in the Williamsport area and said he was heading south on Highway 15 by 10 p.m. He mentioned stopping for a meal at a restaurant, and if he had truly been at the restaurant at that time, he would not have been able to commit the crime. However, investigators could not verify his presence there at that time, which weakened his alibi. Then, at 11:24 p.m., Richard called his sister to inform her that he and Richie would need to stay at a hotel. This call became crucial for the investigation. Detectives began to trace Richard's cell phone location at the time of the call, which altered the direction of the investigation. The cell phone company provided coverage maps, allowing police to estimate where Richard made the call. They found that Richard had enough time to commit the crime and reach the hotel, where he checked in at 12:57 a.m. Detectives retraced the route from Miriam's home to the hotel, confirming that Richard could have committed the crime by 10:37 p.m. and still arrived in Harrisburg on time. The distance between the crime scene and the hotel was approximately 100 miles, and despite poor weather conditions, investigators made the trip within the required time frame. Now, Richard was the only suspect without an alibi. While this did not make him guilty, it did raise suspicions. The police needed concrete evidence to link him to the crime. They caught a break when 2 men walking in the woods found a modified rifle. Finding it unusual, they called the police. The rifle had a shortened barrel, a stock, and an optical sight, but the bolt was missing, and its serial numbers had been erased. It was identified as a rifle that matched the bullet that killed Miriam, and it was found near the road Richard drove on the night of the murder. Experts examined the suppressor found at the crime scene to see if it fit the rifle. They discovered that a screw had been added to the barrel, allowing the suppressor to attach perfectly. The challenge now was to link this weapon to Richard. The rifle was a Savage .23D Hornet, and police learned that Richard had inherited weapons from his father, with only his Aunt Jean being aware of this. A detective spoke with Richard's Aunt, Jean, who showed him a photo album. In a black and white photo, she revealed her brother, aka Richard's father, posing with a Savage .23D rifle. Too many coincidences pointed to Richard as a possible perpetrator. He had inherited the rifle along with other guns, but the Savage rifle was missing from his collection. Investigators needed more evidence for a conviction. They found several DNA samples at the scene that did not match Richard's. When the snow melted, they returned to the area where the rifle was found and conducted a detailed search. They discovered a pair of athletic shoes that matched the size and tread pattern of the footprints at the crime scene, indicating that the prints could have been left by the same shoes. The coincidence of the sneakers and rifle found in the woods being linked to the crime was highly unlikely. Experts needed to establish that the shoes belonged to Richard, but the sneakers were size 14, whereas Richard wore size 10. It was possible that he deliberately wore shoes that were not his size to confuse the police. The shoes were sent for forensic analysis. A hair was found on one of the sneakers, and DNA testing revealed that it did not match Richard's. This was another setback for the investigators, but they remained determined. They theorized that Richard had given his son, Richie, sleeping pills to keep him asleep in the car. A further hair test was conducted, this time looking for a match to Richie's DNA instead of Richard's. They found a match based on mitochondrial DNA. Richard had tried to use false DNA to mislead the police, but in the end, his son's DNA linked him to the murder. Investigators believe that Richie's hair accidentally made its way into the sneaker, possibly transferred from another surface when Richard changed shoes. In December 2002, 3 years after Miriam's death, Richard was unexpectedly arrested. He had been clever in planning the crime. He created an alibi, constructed a silencer, and intentionally wore the wrong shoe size. However, he left DNA evidence on the silencer and a cigarette butt. To mislead the investigation, he even mailed a hair to the police, but all the DNA samples turned out to belong to other individuals. Richard destroyed the serial numbers on the rifle to hide his tracks, but it appeared he rushed his alibi since he didn't properly conceal the rifle and boots. Richard had meticulously prepared for this crime, modifying the rifle and making a suppressor, which required considerable time and effort. He chose a weekend for the crime when his son, Richie, was staying with him to prevent his son from witnessing any violence. The plan began on Friday around 5 p.m. when he picked up Richie from Miriam's home. He returned a few hours later, parking approximately half a mile away from her house, and gave his son a sleeping pill to ensure he would sleep through the events that were about to unfold. Richard then walked to a spot by a tree along the creek bed, waiting for the right moment when Miriam was near the kitchen window. He couldn't shoot from any other angle, so he patiently waited for hours. At 10:37 p.m., while she was on the phone with a friend, he took his shot. He left behind evidence, a cigarette butt, intentionally placed where it could be discovered. He then fled the scene, leaving size 14 shoe prints, returned to his car, and drove south. He found a secluded area to dispose of his evidence, getting rid of the rifle and sneakers before heading back. At 11:24 p.m., he called his sister, hoping the phone records would support his alibi. However, they actually indicated that he had sufficient time to commit the murder. Though Richard did not admit to the crime, the jury reached a different conclusion and convicted him. In 2004, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Miriam's family issued a statement describing the situation as tragic, expressing that they felt there were no winners, but they were relieved to finally have closure and justice. Richard attempted to appeal the court's decision, but his efforts were unsuccessful. Let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. The people here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher who was well respected and loved by everyone, often being praised for his hard work. His wife, Lovella, was the principal at the same school. Together, while they didn't make a lot of money, they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Criziel Lewis, was 16 years old. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer even at such a young age and was determined to work hard to achieve that goal. Besides being intelligent, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. His older sister, Criziel Gwyn, was the more intense one, super smart, driven, and goal-oriented. She had always been that way as a kid, being a Girl Scout with a sash covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwyn didn't stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwyn was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's how she met 17-year-old Janice Sebeil. However, unlike Gwyn and Lewis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memories began around the age of 8. Before that, everything was a blur. She only recalls being found by a stranger wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. A stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online in an attempt to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippine version of Child Protective Services, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwyn, and Gwyn was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind, an idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Together with Lewis, Gwyn decided to present this idea to their parents. Like a well-thought-out thesis, they approached the subject with serious dedication, explaining that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a significant consideration in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwyn's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attended church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love. Gwyn and Lewis respected that. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwad welcomed her with open arms. Lewis even gave up his own room so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't have to wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. We could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On December 10th of that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. Instead, it marked the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, their father, was at school doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday, while Lovella, their mother, was away on a work trip. Everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were inside. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent outside the front door. His eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. When he entered the living room, that a horrifying sight met his eyes. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwyn. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body. Her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds. But it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwyn, near the main door, crews found Lewis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds, and the amount of blood suggested that the attack had happened just moments before crews arrived. But there was one more person missing. Janice's heart pounded as crews continued to search the house, calling her name. Finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet and her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, crews immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray, cabinets had been pried open and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police did not rule out the parents as persons of interest. The police needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence just outside the front door. The police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. About 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed the attacker had deliberately discarded these items to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene became increasingly horrifying. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood reveal the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded knife, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to have been used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Lewis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The fact that so many different tools were used and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Lewis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, crews confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Mlang, North Cotabato announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. Autopsies were performed on Gwen and Lewis over 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised, covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely. Meanwhile, Lewis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bones and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, though the rooms appeared ransacked. Only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Lewis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard screams, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Lewis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen. In fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in her bedroom, and hid under the bed. Janice was too scared to call the police, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adoptive mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media, saying, "Help. Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help." After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She even changed her social media username and put her phone on silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. However, there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the moment the attack began, so why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwen was the first victim, not Lewis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound suspicious. But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some information about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Lewis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. However, after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he stored it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwen, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions very well, almost as if they had been living in the house with them. Things became even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed that no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the attack. At the crime scene, it had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was significant because it meant that whoever had done this was likely someone familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it was pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor. Under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Rather than arresting her immediately, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department while they investigated who had actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a considerable amount of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. However, things took another unexpected turn when Lovella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. To her surprise, it wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Cano Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to determine if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. Soon enough, witnesses came forward confirming that Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman stated she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then, on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo. Janice explained that her motive stemmed from deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwyn and Louis were receiving all the love and attention from their parents. In her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing that she would get all the love and attention she had recently started receiving after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwyn's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, although it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role as well. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was also a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated banned substance raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwyn's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself. Unfortunately, the phone had been damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders. He had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lovella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she had missed. According to Lovella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine. The family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. However, soon small red flags began to show. In August 2021, when Gwen's parents were hospitalized, Cruz noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite this breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwen, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, attributing the theft to the survival instinct she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake. They accepted her apology, believing the worst was behind them. However, as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. She became lazy, irresponsible, neglecting household chores and showing a disregard for reminders. She apologized but never followed through. Although troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. On that day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lavella mom and dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, indicating a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, setting in motion what was about to happen. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Her parents weren't very active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started circulating online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 children, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her father's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and after remarrying, her mother tried to make the best of the situation by dividing what little they had left among her children. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that reunion didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. This betrayal shocked everyone. Things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwen and Lewis. In her grief, she kept apologizing, overwhelmed with guilt about her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mother even knelt down, but the Magwad weren't seeking revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, only seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mother encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit Janice at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn when evidence surfaced suggesting the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she asked. Some sources claim that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie The Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing. She was seen smiling and laughing in court, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lavella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse, but her coldness only deepened their pain. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, to their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice Sibiel was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda Aldo Cano Jr. received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition: they would serve them under the supervision of the Department of Social Welfare and Development until their 21st birthdays, after which they would be transferred to adult prisons. Gwyn and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, however, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lovella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to this law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable but are sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the US and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lovella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. They publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwyn almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Lewis calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her brother. On October 19, 2021, a cool autumn day in Wood Street, Kettering, a peaceful market town in Northamptonshire. Wood Street, with its simple homes and ghost houses, was alive with the usual sounds of everyday life, neighbors chatting, cars passing by, children returning home from school. But just after noon, that tranquility was shattered. Marta Kmieleka, a 31-year-old woman whose life was cut short, leaving her community in turmoil and her family forever altered. Northamptonshire police received a call expressing concern for a person's welfare at a residence on Wood Street. A family member had not heard from their loved one for several days and sensed that something was wrong. Officers arrived expecting to conduct a routine welfare check. They forced their way into a rented room and discovered a scene that initiated one of the town's most disturbing crime investigations. Marta was dead. The small, cluttered room was filled with secrets that would take months to uncover. What happened here? The police cordoned off the street, and neighbors watched in shock as forensic teams arrived. Residents from nearby told reporters they had never witnessed anything like this in Kettering. A neighbor expressed his disbelief. Wood Street was meant to be a safe place where nothing significant ever occurred. To reconstruct the timeline of Marta's last hours, investigators analyzed surveillance footage, which became a key piece of evidence. Detectives focused on a crucial time, the night of October 15th, just 4 days before Marta's body was discovered. So, who was she? Marta was a lively, kind, and independent woman who greatly impacted those around her. Marta grew up in Bydgoszcz, a vibrant city in northern Poland known for its charming riverside and close-knit communities. Her family considered her full of life, always smiling, and eager to help. Marta had a special ability to make people feel valued, whether she was assisting a neighbor with groceries or enjoying long conversations with friends over coffee. Her brother and sister-in-law, who later spoke at her inquest, described her as the glue of their family, someone who was always ready to help without needing to be asked. In Poland, Marta had a strong relationship with her parents, especially her father. Friends referred to her as a daddy's girl, not because she was spoiled, but because of the close and unwavering bond they had. She would call her father just to share her day. He listened with pride as he watched her grow into a confident woman. Marta also loved her brother's children and took her aunt duty seriously. She would spoil them with small gifts, play with them, or simply listen to their stories. Her family said she had a natural warmth that made everyone feel valued. At around 25 years old, Marta met Paweł Kmieleki, who was a few years her senior. Paweł was charming, confident, and had a passion for cars, particularly BMWs, which he loved to showcase. Paweł was drawn to her lively personality. Their friends noted that they seemed like an ideal couple. Marta's outgoing nature balanced Paweł's more reserved demeanor. They bonded over common interests like music, weekend trips, and dreams of a life outside of Poland. For Marta, Who was always eager to explore and ambitious, Powell appeared to be a partner who shared her aspirations for new adventures. Their relationship progressed quickly. After dating for a couple of years, they were ready to move forward. On July 29, 2016, Marta and Powell married in a small, joyful ceremony in Bydgoszcz. The day was filled with family, laughter, and Polish traditions. Marta's family, especially her father, was delighted to see her so happy. The couple settled into their married life by renting an apartment in Bydgoszcz. For a while, it seemed like the life Marta had dreamed of, stable, loving, and aimed at a bright future. Marta and Powell had ambitious goals. They sought more than what Bydgoszcz could provide. They wanted opportunities for personal growth, better earnings, and a chance to immerse themselves in a new culture. In 2017, they decided to take a significant step. They moved to England. They chose Kettering, a small town in Northamptonshire, partly because Marta's brother and his family already lived there. This move was a big leap for them. They packed their belongings, said farewells to their families, and arrived in the UK with optimism. Kettering, with its peaceful streets and supportive Polish community, felt like the perfect place for a fresh start. They rented a home together, explored their new surroundings, began building a new life. They enjoyed their time in Kettering by going for walks and visiting local cafes and bars. Initially, the move seemed to deepen their relationship. Marta embraced her new life in Kettering, finding a job and making friends, while Powell also adapted to his work. They often hosted dinners for Marta's brother and his children, with Marta happily playing the role of an aunt by bringing games and treats. Social media posts from that period captured their joy, showcasing them smiling with each other and sharing captions about their new adventures. Beneath the seemingly perfect moments, problems were emerging. Powell, who had always been somewhat possessive, began to show a controlling behavior that Marta hadn't fully recognized back in Poland. He started questioning her whereabouts, the people she spent time with, and why she was making new friends. Marta, who valued her independence, struggled with being monitored. She wanted to live freely, not just exist under Powell's watch. As time passed, Powell's jealousy intensified. He was no longer just protective, he had become obsessive. While Marta was flourishing and expanding her social network within Kettering's Polish community, Powell couldn't cope. He bombarded her with texts to find out her plans and would often show up unexpectedly where she was with friends. Those around her noticed that she didn't seem like herself anymore. Her usual vibrancy had faded. While Marta shrugged it off, saying Powell was just stressed or adjusting to life in England, her close friends could see the underlying tension. Though Marta always wore a smile, her family later revealed that she had spoken to them about Powell's behavior, hinting at arguments that left her feeling trapped. The tension between Powell and Marta escalated from emotional to physical abuse. Court records later showed 3 incidents of Powell's aggression toward Marta, one in August 2020, another during Easter 2021, and a third in September 2021, just weeks before the tragedy. These incidents were not isolated, they were part of a recurring pattern. Though always a strong-willed person, Marta began to fear the man she once loved. She confided in friends that she no longer recognized Powell. She felt suffocated by his jealousy. Despite her fears, she stayed with him, perhaps hoping for change or feeling burdened by their shared past. Powell's controlling behavior extended beyond their home as he harassed Marta's friends and tried to monitor her whereabouts, even stalking her by appearing at her workplace or waiting outside places she visited. By mid-2020, their marriage was falling apart. Marta moved out and found her own place in Kettering, determined to rebuild her life. She began to share her journey of personal growth on social media. Just 5 days before her life ended, she posted a photo with a caption in Polish: "One of the worst mistakes a person can make is wasting years of life waiting for another person to change or develop." This bold statement signified her desire to move on. She started dating again, forming a new relationship with a colleague and planning a future without Powell. Powell was not willing to let Marta go. He continued to text, call, and try to involve himself in her life, even as she tried to distance herself from him. Marta repeatedly pleaded with Powell through messages, asking him to stop contacting her. During their investigation, the police found clear evidence of Powell's obsessive behavior. His messages ranged from desperate pleas to threats, showing his refusal to accept that Marta wanted to end things. Her family, especially her brother and sister-in-law, became aware of her increasing discomfort. When she visited them, still remaining a caring aunt to their children, there was a noticeable sadness in her eyes. She was trying to break free, but Powell's presence felt overwhelming. Marta wasn't just ending a marriage, she was escaping from a constraint. The process of breaking up wasn't instantaneous but involved careful, intentional actions. She began by creating distance, reducing contact, and staying away from places where Powell might be. Marta shared her plans to divorce Powell, whose name was on their official marriage registered in Poland, with her brother and sister-in-law who lived nearby. She had started gathering the necessary paperwork, which involved coordinating with lawyers back in Bydgoszcz. Additionally, Marta found support from her friends in Kettering's Polish community. They surrounded her with invitations to dinners, gym sessions, and social outings, helping her reclaim the joy that Powell had suppressed. Powell was unable to let go. His jealousy, which had already caused him pain, developed into an obsession. He refused to accept that his relationship with Marta was over and continued to reach out to her despite her efforts to distance herself. Detective Superintendent later observed that Powell's actions became increasingly desperate. He bombarded Marta with calls and texts, sometimes pleading for another chance and at other times accusing her of betrayal. When she blocked his number, he resorted to using different phones or contacting her friends to gather information about her whereabouts. He would frequently appear at her favorite cafes or hang around her workplace, hoping to encounter her unexpectedly. Marta's friends noticed that she was becoming more anxious. She often looked over her shoulder when she was out. His behavior escalated to stalking. He would follow her from a distance, watching her every move, and once trailed her from her workplace to a friend's house, only leaving after being confronted by her friend. Marta confided in her brother that she felt trapped, as if Powell was always nearby. By October 2021, Marta was doing well despite the influence of Powell. She was excitedly planning a Christmas trip to Poland to visit her father, looking forward to her mother's visit to Kettering, and enjoying a new relationship. On Friday, October 15th, she spent the evening with friends, laughing and texting as they enjoyed drinks together at a local bar. She left around 10:40 p.m., looking sharp and confident as always. However, that night, something unexpected happened. On Monday, October 18th, Marta did not show up for work, which was out of character for her. Her colleagues, who were accustomed to her punctuality, became concerned. Her brother also grew anxious when she didn't answer his calls. The situation escalated when Marta's family received a text from her phone that sounded unusual. It was overly formal and lacked her typical warmth, suggesting it was written by someone else. Her sister-in-law, feeling that something was seriously wrong, suspected that Powell might be involved due to his history of controlling behavior. On Tuesday, October 19th, Marta's sister-in-law visited Powell's rented room on Wood Street. When nobody answered the door, her anxiety grew. She called emergency service to express her concerns about Marta's safety and mentioned Powell's previous aggressive behavior. The Northamptonshire police acted quickly, sending officers to perform a welfare check at the location. What they discovered was shocking. The officers forced their way into Powell's room, breaking down the door. Inside, they found Marta's lifeless body wrapped in a blood-stained duvet. She had suffered 32 sharp force injuries, including cuts to her neck, face, shoulders, and chest, with defensive wounds on her right hand, suggesting that she had fought back. Next to her was Powell, bleeding heavily from up to 9 self-inflicted wounds on his throat. The police immediately secured the area and called for paramedics. Marta was pronounced dead at the scene, her hopes for a new life shattered. Powell, still alive, was taken to the hospital. On October 21st, after confirming that his injuries were not life-threatening, Powell Kmielewski was arrested while in his hospital bed. The detective mentioned that Powell was uncooperative during the investigation. He also noted Powell's initial denial of any previous aggression towards Marta. When detectives interviewed Powell, He remained silent and did not provide any explanation for the events that took place in his room. They questioned him about Marta's final days, her unexplained absence from work, and a suspicious text message, but he revealed nothing, adding to the mystery. Questions arose. Why did Marta visit his room that night? Had Powell lured her there? What led to such a tragic outcome? Investigators established a timeline, revealing that Marta had not been seen since October 15th, and her body had likely been in Powell's room for nearly 4 days. During this time, Powell continued with his daily routine as if nothing had happened. A text sent from Marta's phone emerged as a significant clue, indicating that Powell may have attempted to conceal his involvement. Marta's family, particularly her brother and sister-in-law, were devastated. They had warned her to avoid Powell, but none could have anticipated the depths of his desperation. The investigation into Marta's death relied heavily on tangible evidence, with the security camera footage from Wood Street and surrounding areas being the most telling. Northamptonshire police thoroughly searched CCTV and Ring doorbell recordings, which provided a disturbing glimpse into Marta's final moments. On Friday, October 15, 2021, Marta spent the evening at her friend's house on Woodland Court, enjoying herself and having a good time. She was texting, laughing, and sharing flirtatious messages with a colleague she was dating. At the same time, she received persistent messages from Powell, who was urging her to come over to his place and even asked her to bring pizza. The previous day, she had told him off in a message and requested that he leave her alone. Despite this, Powell continued to text her and reached out to a mutual friend to find out if Marta was at here. Upon confirming her location, he decided to act. At 10:42 p.m., Marta left her friend's house, walking alone along Wood Street towards Rockingham Road. Security footage showed her walking confidently, dressed for a night out and carrying a small bag. However, just a few minutes later, around 10:45 p.m., cameras revealed Powell leaving his rented room and heading towards Bath Road, intentionally moving to intersect her path. Powell was recorded leaving his home on Wood Street to find Marta, as noted by Northamptonshire police based on footage from near Wilson Terrace. The video showed a struggle between them. Marta appeared to be walking normally at first but then seemed to resist when Powell grabbed her arm. She stumbled and briefly fell, coughing and unsteady on her feet. Audio from a Ring doorbell captured her labored coughs along with Powell's cold command, "Come on, not far now. Can you hear me?" He was seen forcefully guiding her, at one point lifting her in a bear hug as she struggled to walk. By 10:56 p.m., the low-quality footage showed them entering his house, and that was the last time anyone but Powell saw Marta alive. Inside that room, the situation became increasingly unclear, but Powell's interactions with Marta's phone revealed important information. At 11:01 p.m., just 5 minutes after they arrived, Powell took a photo of Marta lying on the floor. It's uncertain if she was already injured at that time. Approximately 90 minutes later, around 12:30 a.m. on October 16th, he captured images of messages between Marta and her new boyfriend on her phone that confirmed her new relationship. Powell's fixation on Marta's new life, especially her relationship with her new boyfriend, drove his actions. He didn't just spy on her, he went further by using Marta's phone to send messages in an effort to hide his involvement. He texted her friends and family, imitating her writing style to create the illusion that she was still alive. One particular message sent to her family was noticeably formal, unlike Marta's usual warm and casual tone, which raised suspicions. These messages were part of Powell's strategy to delay any suspicion and buy himself time while he remained in the room with Marta's body for nearly 4 days. Marta was last seen alive at 10:56 p.m. on October 15th, when she entered Powell's room. Detectives suspect she died shortly after, likely before midnight, based on a photo Powell took at 11:01 p.m. and the extent of her 32 stab wounds. The injuries to her neck were determined to be the cause of death in the autopsy. The following day, he used Marta's phone to send messages to her male contacts, pretending to be her and attempting to entice them into intimate encounters. On October 17th, just 2 days after Marta's death, surveillance cameras captured him casually walking to a nearby shop to buy 6 cans of beer and a soft drink before returning to his room. He showed no signs of grief, seamlessly blending into the daily life of Kettering while Marta's body lay covered in a blood-stained duvet. This footage was incriminating, revealing a man capable not only of murder but also of continuing his life as if nothing had happened. Powell was arrested on October 21st after his condition stabilized. He faced murder charges, and the evidence against him, CCTV footage, phone records, and forensic analysis, was substantial. Prosecutors presented his motive as jealousy and an inability to accept Marta's new life. He had expressed to friends that he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else being intimate with her, a feeling that ultimately led to his final act. By March 3, 2022, when Powell Kmielewski appeared in Northampton Crown Court and confessed to murdering Marta, the case had already captured the attention of the Kettering community and beyond. His guilty plea eliminated the need for a lengthy trial, which spared Marta's family from the pain of recounting every detail in court. The focus then shifted to a sentencing hearing on September 6, 2023, aimed at determining Powell's punishment and allowing Marta's loved ones to express their grief. Marta's brother and sister-in-law sat in the gallery, visibly heartbroken as they awaited the verdict on the punishment Powell would face for taking her life. The prosecution, represented by Northamptonshire Police and the Crown Prosecution Service, presented a strong argument for a tough sentence. They claimed that Powell's actions were not just a momentary impulse but rather the result of an ongoing pattern of control and obsession. They highlighted the 7 defensive wounds on Marta's right hand as evidence that she fought for her life. The prosecution also referenced Powell's history of domestic abuse, mentioning incidents from August 2020, Easter 2021, and September 2021 to illustrate his increasing aggression. In 2020, he confronted Marta at her workplace on Rockingham Road about her connections with other men, forcibly took her phone to search for evidence of infidelity, then punched her multiple times, resulting in bruises on her back and face, along with a cut lip. Although the police were contacted and Marta initially gave a statement, she later retracted it. Powell offered an apology to his wife through a community resolution process. Marta left him in September that year, but the harassment persisted with continued phone calls and messages. In Easter 2021, he became aggressive during a family party, pushing her. 3 months before her death, he found Marta at the pub, grabbed her arm, and threatened her. The next month, he was reported for harassment. Marta lived in constant fear, telling friends that she was afraid Powell might kill her. Despite her efforts to escape, like moving out, planning to divorce him in Poland, and pleading with him to leave her alone, he continued to stalk and manipulate her, even sending deceptive texts from her phone to avoid raising suspicion. The prosecution highlighted Powell's lack of remorse, noting that he remained with Marta's body for almost 4 days. Powell initially denied his history of abuse while attempting to manipulate the court proceedings. They urged for a life sentence with a lengthy minimum term, arguing that Powell's actions deserved no mercy. On the other hand, Powell's defense team had limited options due to his guilty plea and the strong evidence against him. With the help of an interpreter, they acknowledged the seriousness of his crime but requested a shorter minimum term. They claimed that Powell's actions were impulsive, driven by emotional distress from his divorce and Marta's new relationship. The defense argued that he was deeply affected by the breakup, citing his self-inflicted wounds as signs of remorse or mental anguish. They contended that, although the attack was horrific, it was not premeditated and that Powell's guilty plea had spared the family from a trial. However, these arguments were weak compared to the prosecution's evidence of Powell's calculated stalking and the brutality of the attack. On September 6, 2023, Judge Herbert announced the verdict. Powell Kmielewski was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 18 years and 4 months. The judge directly addressed Powell, stating, "It was a prolonged and violent attack driven entirely by anger and jealousy." He stressed Marta's fear, noting, "The evidence clearly shows that Marta did not feel safe with you and feared you might kill her." The judge cautioned that Powell might never be released, as his eligibility for parole would be based on the parole board's evaluation of his risk to the public. This means that at 40 years old, Powell would be at least 58 before he could apply for parole, reflecting the serious nature of his crime. Marta's family felt the deep impact of the case. Her brother and sister-in-law, who were present at the sentencing, shared a moving statement through Northamptonshire police, expressing that no sentence could alleviate their suffering. However, they found a small sense of closure in knowing that Powell was held accountable for his actions. Marta Kmieleka's life, marked by warmth, resilience, and a pursuit of freedom, was tragically cut short by Powell Kmieleki's jealousy and violence, leaving her family and the Kettering community in profound grief. The sentencing of Powell to life imprisonment with a minimum of 18 years and 4 months brought a measure of justice, though it could never fill the void left by Marta's absence. Her story serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of domestic abuse and the strength of those who fight for their independence, ensuring her memory endures as a call for awareness and change. In May 2023, police in Spain received a troubling call from a peaceful neighborhood in Torremolinos. Inside one of the apartments, they found the body of a young woman who had been stabbed multiple times. The suspect managed to escape but was caught a few hours later at a nearby cafe. However, this tragedy was just the starting point for a string of discoveries that connected to a case that had remained unsolved for 9 years. Behind the wall of a different apartment, investigators uncovered evidence that stunned even the most seasoned forensic professionals. In 2011, Sabora Gagani lived with her boyfriend Marco Gayo Romeo in a small house in Torremolinos, Spain, close to the beaches. On the surface, their life appeared stable. Sabora worked as a waitress, and Marco was a chef. She frequently called her mother, Elisabetta, to reassure her that everything was fine. However, beneath this facade of stability were serious issues that became more apparent over time. When Elisabetta visited, she could immediately sense the tension in their home. Arguments between Sabora and Marco happened even in front of her. Elisabetta noticed that Sabora often tried to excuse Marco's jealousy and anger, attributing them to temporary difficulties. Yet, Elisabetta believed that their problems were much deeper than everyday challenges. Just 2 years ago, Sabora was a very different person. Sabora was born on September 14, 1991, in Albania. She was known for her vibrant and cheerful nature from an early age. After her parents divorced, her mother, Elisabetta, relocated with her children to Rome, Italy, where they began anew. Sabora quickly became well-liked by her peers, earning the nickname Tibby because of her lively and warm personality. Despite facing financial difficulties, she was determined to help her family. She began working as a waitress at a young age but never lost sight of her dreams. Her natural beauty, slim figure, and success in a local beauty contest opened doors to the modeling industry. However, her greatest aspiration was to become a teacher, as she truly loved working with children. Things started to change when Sabora turned 18. At a cafe, she met Marco, a 31-year-old man whose charm and confidence immediately attracted her. At that time, she knew very little about him. He was divorced, had a sister, and seemed eager to start anew. However, beneath this appealing exterior was a troubled past. Marco had a reputation for aggressive behavior and issues with substance abuse, which had led to multiple encounters with the police. Despite these red flags, Sabora was drawn to his charisma and chose to ignore the warnings. A year into their relationship, Marco proposed that Sabora move with him to Spain, claiming that there were better job opportunities there than in Italy. Elisabetta tried to convince her against it, expressing doubts about Marco's intentions, but Sabora was determined. She believed this move would be the start of a new chapter where she and Marco could create a happy life together. Initially, Spain seemed like a great opportunity for Sabora and Marco. Sabora quickly secured a job as a waitress, while Marco found work as a pizza chef. They rented a cozy home, and Sabora shared her hopeful plans with her mother. Unfortunately, their stability didn't last long. Marco started losing job after job, often blaming his employers for his failures. His frustration and jealousy intensified, leading to a rise in his aggressive behavior, which escalated from small disagreements to serious conflicts. When Elisabetta visited Spain to check on Sabora, she was taken aback by the situation. Sabora, once vibrant, confident, now appeared withdrawn and subdued. Marco showed his irritation openly in Elisabetta's presence. Their arguments became louder. Despite these significant issues, Sabora continued to defend Marco, reassuring her mother that everything would get better. Those who knew Sabora were confused about why she ignored the warning signs in her relationship. She may have looked to Marco for the support and stability she missed during her childhood. When her family moved from Albania to Italy, they faced many challenges. Elisabetta worked hard to create a better life for her children, but Sabora had to take on adult responsibilities at a young age. Her relationship with Marco seemed like a way to fill the emotional gap, but instead, it added more stress. Life in Spain was becoming increasingly difficult for Sabora as her youthful dreams faded away. In July 2014, Sabora Gagani vanished unexpectedly, leaving her family in despair. The last time she was heard from was through a text message to Marco, her ex-partner, on July 7th. After that, her phone was off and her social media accounts were inactive, which was not typical for her. Earlier, Sabora had told her mother she had finally broken up with Marco, moved into a new apartment, and felt a sense of freedom. She compared it to a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. However, her abrupt silence worried everyone. The situation became even more puzzling when Marco showed up unexpectedly at Elisabetta's home in Italy. He tried to act like a concerned and remorseful man, claiming to care about what had happened. While having coffee, he told Elisabetta that he had no idea where Sabora might be. Marco explained that they had argued shortly before she vanished, and she had left without taking her belongings. However, he later changed his story, saying that a security guard at their apartment complex had seen Sabora leaving with 2 suitcases. These inconsistent statements raised more suspicions and increased worries. Elisabetta remembered that just a few days before, Sabora had decided to end her relationship with Marco for good after 3 years of attempts to fix things. Despite her efforts to distance herself from him, Marco remained persistently involved in her life. In early July, he unexpectedly called Elisabetta to ask if Sabora had returned to Italy. This question seemed strange to Elisabetta, especially considering Sabora's recent breakup and her repeated attempts to cut ties with Marco. Her mother recalled that, before, in 2013, Sabora had even gone back to her mother's home in Italy to leave everything behind, had realized that there was no future for her and Marco. However, Marco refused to let go. He traveled to Italy to see Sabora, begging her to give him another chance and promising to change, even proposing to her. Ultimately, exhausted by their turbulent relationship, Sabora succumbed to his promises. Unfortunately, the same cycle of jealousy, control, and aggressive behavior soon returned, disrupting her peace once again. At one point, Sabora told her mother that if she ever left Marco for good, she might have to disappear completely because she feared he wouldn't let her go. In the following months, Sabora made frequent trips to Italy, likely because her Spanish residency permit had expired. There were reports that she may have used a fake Italian ID for these travels. Elisabetta noticed her daughter appeared more and more scared, but Sabora rarely provided details about her situation. She only mentioned she was looking for a way to escape her troubles. Her family realized something was seriously wrong. Sabora would never cut off contact with them, especially with her mother and brothers. Now, all they could do was wait and hope that Sabora had chosen to go into hiding to escape Marco's grip. However, the conflicting stories and complete silence from her only raised more concerns. By 2015, the investigation into Sabora's disappearance had not made significant progress, despite the efforts of her family and law enforcement. Her mother, Elisabetta, was determined to file an official report with the authorities. She strongly believed that Marco, Sabora's ex-partner, was involved, as he was the last person known to have seen her before she disappeared. His behavior during the investigation only deepened suspicions. When questioned, Marco stuck to his story, claiming that Sabora left their home after an argument, after that they lost contact with each other. However, many of her personal items, including clothes and identification, remained in the apartment, which was strange. Despite his claims, Marco never reported her missing to the police. Instead, he claimed he tried to find her himself by printing and distributing flyers in their neighborhood. He also provided conflicting theories about where she might be, suggesting at one point that she had traveled to Argentina or had been seen with an unknown man with whom she allegedly had a confrontation. These statements were inconsistent and lacked credible evidence. Elisabetta, feeling distrustful of Marco, took matters into her own hands to find her daughter. She contacted the media and a specialized organization that helps raise awareness about missing persons cases. As a result, photos of Sabora and requests for information started appearing in both Italian and Spanish news outlets. However, these efforts did not lead to any new information. While Sabora's family continued to search for answers, Marco seemed to be living a fairly normal life. He changed his appearance by shaving his head and growing a beard, likely to avoid drawing attention. During this period, he entered into 2 new relationships, both of which ended due to the women complaining about his aggressive behavior. Nevertheless, Marco stayed in Spain, frequently going to the gym and joining a shooting club, which concerned those who knew his background. Sabora's family refused to lose hope. Elisabetta continually urged the police to step up their investigation. As a response, law enforcement began reviewing the case files to identify any overlooked details. They paid close attention to Marco's statements, which had seemed inconsistent from the start. Moreover, there were questions about why he hadn't contacted the police immediately after she went missing. As time went on, public interest in Sabora's case decreased. Despite her family's relentless search for answers, Marco, who was still in Spain, seemed to adapt to life after her disappearance. To his neighbors, he seemed friendly, focused on fitness and socializing. However, concerns about his character lingered due to his past relationship with Sabora and complaints from his new partners. While Sabora's family held on to hope for updates, the investigation remained stalled. Authorities broadened their search using international missing persons databases, but these efforts produced no leads. For those who knew Sabora well, the uncertainty about her fate was agonizing. By 2023, Marco seemed to have changed his life for the better. He was now living with a new partner, Paula, and they had a child together. Yet, beneath this seemingly fresh start, the same problems that troubled Marco for years persisted. His relationship with Paula was unstable. She confided in close friends and co-workers about experiencing physical abuse from him. During this time, Marco had difficulty maintaining a steady job, which made their financial situation worse. Over time, Paula became more aware of the challenges in Paula and Marco's relationship. She felt that Marco was not only aggressive at work but also unsupportive at home. Despite Paula's efforts to create the appearance of a normal life, her struggles were becoming apparent. For Paula, her primary goal was to save enough money to leave Marco and fight for her children's custody. Marco's situation was getting worse. He often told his master about his financial problems, stating he was working only for his family's sake. However, his aggressive behavior at work and inability to get along with coworkers made his master wonder if keeping him employed was worth the hassle. Meanwhile, Paula's friend noticed how serious Paula's situation was and encouraged her to stand up against the mistreatment. Despite this, Paula was too afraid to take any confrontational action. She confided in her friend that Marco had hit her 4 times and kicked her, but she minimized the seriousness of these incidents. This indicated that Paula needed immediate help. On Tuesday, May 16, 2023, Paula enjoyed her day off, excitedly sharing her plans for a relaxing evening with her coworkers. However, the next day, May 17th, took a tragic turn. Around 11:30 a.m., loud shouting came from the apartment that Paula shared with Marco. Although arguments were common between them, this time it sounded much more severe. Paula's voice was clearly heard, calling for help. Victor, Marco's landlord and boss, could hear a loud disturbance coming from her apartment. Worried, he hurried over with a co-worker from the restaurant. When they arrived at the door, they began knocking and shouting to find out what was going on inside. They heard soft sobbing, which then stopped abruptly. Shortly after, Marco opened the door, appearing calm, and told them everything was fine, saying Paula had just gone to bed. However, the absence of Paula's voice made Victor uneasy. This situation was particularly alarming given recent events. Just days earlier, Victor had fired Marco after a series of troubling incidents, including the mysterious disappearance of a kitchen knife. Victor had begun to distrust Marco and wanted to prevent any further issues. Now, Marco was involved in another troubling situation. While Victor went to get a spare key to the apartment, the co-worker called the police. Marco, seeming to recognize that the situation was getting serious, remained calm but acted unexpectedly. He suddenly left the apartment and walked out of the building without explanation. When the police arrived, they found the apartment locked. Victor soon returned with a spare key and entered the apartment to investigate further. Inside one of the rooms, they discovered Paula's body on the floor, stabbed 14 times. Her clothes were drenched in blood, and it was clear she had died several hours prior. The police secured the crime scene and called in forensic experts to gather evidence. They also began searching for Marco, who had fled the scene. Meanwhile, Paula's body was sent for an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death. Just a few hours later, Marco was found sitting calmly at a cafe table. He did not resist arrest and appeared unfazed by the situation. On May 20, 2023, 3 days after Paula's tragic death, Marco appeared in court. He was charged with a crime involving aggravating circumstances related to gender-based violence. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation and substance testing. Marco was denied bail and remained in custody during the hearing. He chose to stay silent, only speaking to respond to his lawyer's questions. There was no mention of Sabora Gagani. However, just a few days after his arrest, Sabora's case gained attention again. Marco then made a surprising confession while being interrogated at the police station. He stated that during an argument in 2014, he had killed Sabora and hidden her body in the apartment they shared. Despite his confession, law enforcement decided to focus on the investigation into Paula's death first and postponed verifying Marco's claims about Sabora. Elisabetta, Sabora's mother, was devastated by the news of Marco's arrest and his admission about her daughter. For 9 years, she had advocated for a reopening of the investigation, convinced of Marco's involvement in Sabora's disappearance. Marco's confession led to the official reopening of Sabora's case, prompting investigators to validate his statements, starting with a look into the apartment where he and Sabora had lived in 2014. By early June 2023, Spanish investigators concentrating on Sabora's case meticulously examined the building layout where she and Marco had lived. A notable detail emerged: there was a large space that should have been part of the bedroom according to the building plans, but it was missing in reality. After receiving permission, investigators entered the apartment on June 6 and broke through the wall. They found a large wooden box filled with lime. Inside the box, police discovered important evidence: a plastic bag containing a knife with dried blood and personal items believed to belong to Sabora. Among these items was a wilted bouquet of flowers on top. The box also contained several plastic bags, one of which had a camping sleeping bag that held human remains. These remains were sent for forensic analysis to identify the person and determine the cause of death. To confirm the identity, Spanish authorities requested DNA samples from Sabora's family in Italy. On June 10, police visited the home of Sabora Gagani's mother, Elisabetta, to collect a saliva sample. The DNA results confirmed that the recovered remains belonged to Sabora. In the week that followed, new information about Marco's actions came to light. During interrogations in Spain, he claimed to have tried to dispose of the body using acid, but this claim could not be verified. Investigators observed that Marco often changed his statements. For Elisabetta, the confirmation of her daughter's remains was heartbreaking. After 9 years of uncertainty, she felt her hope had been taken away, although she had never stopped seeking answers about what happened to her daughter. Over the years, her life had changed significantly. Sabora's father passed away from illness without ever discovering the truth about his daughter. Although her efforts ultimately led to answers, they also brought a bittersweet feeling of closure. Forensic experts are continuing to analyze the evidence collected from the location where Sabora's remains were discovered. A knife found in a plastic bag has been sent for testing to check for biological traces that might connect it to Marco. At the same time, Spanish investigators are working with their Italian colleagues to gather additional materials related to Sabora's disappearance. Although there is evidence against him and he initially confessed to being involved in Sabora's death, including disclosing where her remains were located, he later took back his confession. Marco's lawyer claims that his statements were made under pressure and should not be accepted as evidence in court. Nevertheless, investigators argue that the items found in a hidden box, including Sabora's personal belongings, give them solid grounds for pursuing further charges. The investigation into Paula's death is still active, with Marco as the main suspect. In January 2024, several months after the discovery of Sabora's remains, her family was finally able to hold a burial after all forensic examinations were completed. Her remains were returned to her loved ones in Italy, where friends and family gathered to say their final goodbyes. As a tribute, they released balloons into the sky, each carrying heartfelt messages of hope and farewell. Meanwhile, significant attention was on the ongoing legal case against Marco, who was facing charges related to Paula's death. During a hearing on January 30, 2024, Marco presented a handwritten 17-page letter admitting his responsibility for Paula's death, but he included many conditions. He stated that the conflict stemmed from ongoing arguments about shared debts and her infidelity. Marco claimed that he used excessive force in self-defense during the altercation, which led to the tragedy. Marco admitted certain things about Paula, but he was unwilling to give detailed information about Sabora's case. He confirmed that he wrapped her body in plastic, placed it in a wooden box, covered it with flowers, added lime, and sealed it in a wall. However, he insisted that he was not responsible for her death, claiming that his actions were driven by fear of the situation. During the trial, Marco changed his story about how Sabora died, providing a completely different account. He claimed that the Albanian mafia, which he said he was involved with due to debts, was the one who killed her. According to Marco, he had borrowed €25,000 to start a brothel, but the money was stolen. When he couldn't repay the debt, he said 4 men came to his house, and during an argument, one of them killed Sabora. Marco stated that he was then threatened with his own life and forced to dispose of her body to avoid more trouble. This version of events raised serious concerns among investigators because Marco had changed his statements multiple times during the investigation. It became clear that he had lied to mislead authorities. There was no evidence to support his claims of mafia involvement. An autopsy revealed that Sabora had died from multiple stab wounds, indicating a violent crime. Sabora's family finally learned the truth about her fake years after she was reported missing. Her mother, Elisabetta, shared that she had spent the last 9 years hoping for answers. By May 2024, the trial for Paula's case was in progress, and the court moved forward with a jury trial to address charges of domestic violence and homicide. Meanwhile, Sabora's case had been reopened but had not yet gone to trial, as investigators continued to examine Marco's claims. Further court proceedings were expected. The experiences of Sabora Gagani and Paula illustrate the harmful effects of relationships characterized by manipulation and abuse. Sabora had aspirations for a promising future, while Paula was working to regain control of her life. Both women were negatively impacted by the same individual. Their stories remind us of the crucial need to identify the early signs of abusive behavior and take action to prevent further harm. The Jansen family appeared to be a loving and supportive unit, like many other families. However, one day, everything changed dramatically. An unexpected event occurred in their home. This incident triggered a chain of events that devastated the family and shocked those around them. Law enforcement, friends, neighbors all sought to understand how this seemingly perfect family could unravel what actually happened behind closed doors. In the dense forests of British Columbia, Randy Jansen led an ordinary life in a small town called Langley. Known for its brick storefronts and cozy coffee shops, Langley was viewed as a peaceful haven. Randy experienced years of hard work and unfulfilled dreams that often brought him unhappiness. From a young age, Randy had a strong bond with his father, who worked at a local lumber mill. His father taught him the skills of woodworking. After graduating high school, Randy followed in his father's footsteps by securing a job at the same mill. The job was tough, requiring long hours and significant physical effort, but Randy was used to hard work. In Langley, the lumber mill was seen as a vital part of the local economy and way of life. For more than 10 years, he committed himself to the challenging routine of processing wood and transporting logs. Although the work was repetitive and tiring, it provided him with stability. Each day might have seemed the same, but Randy found meaning in the rhythm of his work and his role in the community. The lumber mill represented stability in Randy's life, while music served as his escape, a way for him to express emotions he often found difficult to put into words. Since childhood, music had been important to him. Over time, playing guitar and singing shifted from being just a hobby to a crucial outlet for his feelings. Randy often performed at a local bar in Langley, where residents gathered to relax after their long workdays and enjoy live music. On stage, he transformed from his usually quiet self into an engaging and energetic performer, captivating his audience. The townspeople appreciated his heartfelt performances, which were filled with authenticity and passion. At a local bar one ordinary evening, Randy met Laurel, a woman who would profoundly impact his life. Laurel, 6 years older than Randy, worked as a bartender and often watched his performances from behind the bar. She was confident, charismatic, well loved by the patrons for her ability to create a welcoming atmosphere and her friendly demeanor. What began as casual chats about music and life quickly developed into a deeper bond. Their mutual love for music and shared aspirations brought them closer. Laurel played the piano and, although her life had taken a different path, she had always dreamed of pursuing a professional music career. This common dream, paired with genuine interest in each other, soon evolved into something much more significant. Life at the lumber mill went on as usual for Randy, but everything changed with Laurel's presence. Their relationship grew stronger as they started planning their future together. Although Langley felt familiar and comfortable, it began to seem too small for the aspirations they had. They dreamed of a life where music could be more than just a pastime. They wanted it to be the core of their future. Randy's days at the mill, his nights performing at the bar, and his evenings with Laurel filled him with a sense of purpose, love. He hoped for what lay ahead. Randy and Laurel frequently looked back on their wedding day in 1990. It was a modest ceremony with just their closest friends and family, creating a warm and intimate setting. The event featured live music, including a special song that Randy sang for Laurel, marking the start of their loving journey together. A few years later, their daughter Emily was born. She quickly became the center of their family. Randy often expressed how Emily was the best thing that ever happened to him. Anyone who knew them could see the deep love he had for her. Emily was only 8 years old when her life changed drastically. She started suffering from severe headaches that were so painful she could no longer participate in her music activities. From a young age, Emily had a natural talent for singing, which amazed her parents and earned her awards in competitions. She was living a lively life, taking vocal lessons and dreaming of becoming a singer. Her parents, encouraged by her success, did everything possible to support her dreams. Initially, Randy and Laurel struggled to understand their daughter's condition. They visited multiple doctors and underwent numerous medical tests, but none provided clear answers, leaving them confused. Emily had to leave school and start home-based learning because the bright lights and loud noises in classrooms worsened her severe headaches. Her room turned into a dim sanctuary where she spent most of her time. Randy and Laurel took turns caring for her, trying their best to alleviate her pain and offer comfort during her difficult times. After thorough medical evaluations, the doctors diagnosed Emily with migraines. This news deeply affected her entire family. The medications they prescribed provided only slight relief, easing her pain a little but never completely stopping the headaches. The music she previously cherished, which brought her so much happiness, was now unattainable. Once a vibrant and energetic young woman, Emily began to withdraw, spending most of her time in silence, darkness. Randy and Laurel were determined to find a solution for their daughter's condition. They explored numerous treatments, consulted many specialists, and looked into alternative therapies, but nothing provided the lasting relief they had been hoping for. The medical outlook was bleak. Migraines are often chronic, and many people suffer from them for life. Statistics revealed that around 53% of migraine sufferers cannot drive because of their symptoms, 30% find it difficult to finish their education, and 34% encounter issues in maintaining employment. Although these figures indicated that Emily's situation was relatively common, they offered little comfort to her parents, as they witnessed her once vibrant spirit fade. Randy went through a really tough time during these years. Music, which had once been his escape, now reminded him painfully that Emily could no longer share in the joy it brought her. Playing guitar in the evenings felt empty without her voice alongside him, and performing at the local bar, which used to be a source of joy for him, no longer felt fulfilling. He began to spend more time at home to support Emily as much as he could. However, as her condition worsened, both Randy and Laurel felt increasingly powerless. Their vibrant daughter, who was once full of life and determination, now isolated herself in her room, avoiding the world and its noise. Randy continued to work, but his thoughts were constantly with Emily. Each morning, he hoped to find a way to relieve her suffering. By the time Emily turned 18, her condition had worsened significantly. Her migraine episodes became more frequent and intense, sometimes lasting for several days. This constant pain made it difficult for her to study and maintain friendships. Despite these obstacles, Emily remained determined. She enrolled in the Fine Arts program at the University of British Columbia, aspiring to become an opera singer. For Emily, going to university was not just about academics, it was an opportunity to regain a sense of normalcy and pursue the life she had always dreamed of. Despite feeling physically exhausted and experiencing frequent pain, Emily committed herself to staying active. She took vocal lessons, learned music theory, studied art history and literature. She also participated in student events and concerts whenever possible. Her classmates admired her determination to engage in university life despite the challenges she faced. However, beneath this outward involvement, Emily was battling significant struggles. She frequently had to miss classes and catch up on her studies alone. The strong medications prescribed for her migraines left her feeling tired, drowsy, and weak. Her treatment plan included triptans, anticonvulsants, and antidepressants to help manage her symptoms. But these medications also had serious side effects, such as depression, difficulty concentrating, and a decline in her overall health. Over time, Emily chose to limit her medication intake as much as possible to lessen its effects on her body and began exploring alternative ways to manage her condition. Emily focused on meditation and breathing exercises, used cold compresses on her head, and stayed away from bright lights, strong smells, and loud noises. Her room became a safe space where she could escape anything that increased her pain. During her worst migraine episodes, she would sometimes stay in complete darkness for entire days, while her parents took turns caring for her and doing their best to alleviate her discomfort. Despite these challenges, Emily worked hard to maintain a sense of normal life. She kept in touch with her friends, even though she couldn't see them as frequently as before. Sometimes, she had to cancel plans at the last moment due to sudden migraine attacks. However, her friends remained supportive, visiting her at home and spending time with her to ensure she didn't feel alone. Despite her challenges, Emily remained committed to the things she loved. Her desire to return to music and live a fulfilling life never faltered, even as the journey became increasingly difficult. On May 7, 2015, Randy shocked everyone in his life with a Facebook post. He revealed some unimaginable actions he had taken in the prior 10 days. He started the post by expressing his love for his daughter, Emily, whom he described as an exceptional daughter, talented, intelligent, and kind. Emily brought immense joy to their family, filling their home with laughter and always willing to assist others, even while facing her own struggles. Unfortunately, her illness had robbed her of so much, forcing her to give up dreams she had worked tirelessly to achieve. Emily had been experiencing migraines since elementary school. The persistent pain caused her to fall into deep depression, making it common for her to endure days without relief. Randy observed how his daughter watched her classmates enjoy normal lives while she spent her time in hospitals or isolated in her dark, quiet room. Despite her efforts to hope for a brighter future, nothing seemed to alleviate her suffering. Randy worked at a lumber mill, but when he wasn't working, he dedicated all his time to Emily. He often told his friends that she was his whole world and that he couldn't bear the thought of life without her. Watching her in pain and feeling powerless to help was pushing him toward despair. Friends noted how Randy shared his struggles with them, making it evident how deeply he was affected emotionally. In this Facebook post, he confessed to taking a gun and ending Emily's life, explaining that he did it to free her from her constant pain. He described his vision of her as an angel soaring above the clouds, her long hair flowing in the wind, finally at peace. But he didn't stop there. Randy also revealed that he had taken the life of his wife, Laurel, because he couldn't bear the thought of her enduring the heartbreak of losing their daughter. A few days later, he also ended the life of his sister, Shelley, claiming he wanted to spare her from the shame of his actions. In the post, Randy shared Emily's journey in her battle against illness, highlighting her incredible strength and resilience. Unfortunately, despite her efforts, the illness had taken its toll. Randy expressed his helplessness as he watched her suffer daily, knowing he couldn't change her situation. He often told friends that he would do anything to support Emily, and ultimately, he felt this was the only way to help her. At the end of his Facebook post, Randy mentioned that his family was now in a better place, free from suffering. He expressed sorrow for his actions, took full responsibility, and apologized to anyone he had hurt. The post closed with the haunting phrase, "Rest in peace, my little family." After Randy's post went live, his friends and acquaintances immediately alerted the police out of concern for Randy's family. They were shocked by the content and wanted to ensure everyone's safety. Law enforcement acted quickly after receiving several calls. Officers were sent to Randy's home to look into the matter. One of Randy's closest friends, Brian Jones, was filled with fear and confusion as he read the Facebook post. Initially, he hoped it was just a mistake or a cruel joke. However, when he saw the signature, Daddy-O, Hugs and Kisses, a nickname Randy had used since school, Brian understood that Randy had truly written those words. This left Brian in shock and disbelief. He had always seen Randy as a kind and caring person, deeply devoted to his family. The thought that his friend could commit such an act or even possess a firearm was unfathomable to him. Brian remembered how lovingly Randy spoke of his family, making it difficult for him to grasp how things had taken such a tragic turn. The seriousness of the situation struck him immediately, and he knew he needed to respond quickly. He left work early and made his way to Shelley's house, trying to call Randy as he went. Each unanswered call only increased his worry. When Brian got to Shelley's house, he saw a pile of undelivered newspapers on the porch. This was unusual because Shelley was always dependable and took her responsibilities seriously. Her old van was in the driveway, the curtains were tightly shut. The yard was eerily silent, with no signs of life. Brian knocked on the door multiple times, but no one answered. The atmosphere felt unsettling and unnaturally quiet. Shelley had become a private person after her parents died. She lived by herself, had no children, and hardly spoke to her neighbors. Her primary job was delivering newspapers, and she was recognized for her reliability, punctuality. When Brian noticed the newspapers piled up without being picked up, he became worried and called the police. The dispatcher told him that he wasn't the only one worried about the family. A patrol unit was already on its way to investigate. When the police arrived, they tried to reach Randy Jansen, who was inside his house. They saw him through a second-floor window with a gun. The officers used loudspeakers and attempted to call him, but Randy did not reply. Understanding the seriousness of the situation, the officers proceeded cautiously to prevent further escalation. The house was surrounded, and negotiators began their work, but Randy did not show any intention to surrender or communicate. After several hours, the situation became much more critical. Randy set the house on fire, and officers saw smoke rising from the upper floor. They tried to get inside, but the flames spread too quickly, blocking access through the windows. Officers noticed a body wrapped in a sheet on the first floor, but they couldn't reach it to confirm its identity. Within minutes, the fire took over the entire house. When firefighters arrived, the house was fully engulfed in flames, and they could not save it. Investigators discovered 3 bodies in the charred remains of the house on Llanberis Road in Rosedale. 19-year-old Emily was found in her bedroom, wrapped in a sheet. 50-year-old Laurel was located in the kitchen, covered with a blanket. Both women had suffered 2 gunshot wounds to the head. Randy's body was located in a second-floor bedroom. He had died by suicide using a firearm and setting the house ablaze. The positioning of his body and the presence of the weapon indicated that Randy was experiencing severe emotional distress when he made the choice to end his life. When police arrived at the home of Randy's sister in Langley, British Columbia, they found her body in the living room. She had been shot twice in the head and was covered with a blanket. No signs of a struggle, indicating that Randy had likely caught her by surprise. Over the past year, Emily's health had worsened significantly. Doctors had to give her morphine injections to manage her severe pain, and these were used as a last resort. Neighbors often witnessed her parents assisting her into their home after her hospital visits. Emily was so weak that she required help to walk, which was heartbreaking for everyone who knew the family. Randy Jansen, Emily's father, dedicated himself to caring for his family despite facing numerous challenges. A year prior to the tragic events, he sought assistance from their family doctor due to ongoing insomnia and intense stress. He shared his struggles with witnessing his daughter's pain. The doctor suggested using sedatives and advised Randy to focus on getting more rest, but Randy refused the medication, feeling it wouldn't truly solve his problems. Brian noted that Randy had never indicated any thoughts of self-harm or intentions to harm others. He described Randy as a calm and hardworking individual always willing to help. Randy consistently put his family first, so no one could have anticipated he was capable of such actions. Brian observed that Randy had reached his breaking point. He could no longer endure watching his daughter suffer, which led him to make a heartbreaking decision. Neighbors who had known Randy since he was a child found it hard to reconcile this event with the kind and gentle person they remembered. They noted that he had never shown any signs of aggression or cruelty. His actions appeared to stem from a sense of desperation and an inability to cope with the immense pain affecting his family. One neighbor recalled Randy saying that if his daughter were to die, he wouldn't have a reason to live. Emily's last tweet, posted just 4 days before the tragedy, stated, "I complain about the pain, but at least I'm here to feel it. I thank God for the chance to live." In Emily's Twitter account, she wrote, "For the first time in 2 years, I've gone 12 hours without pain. I'm so tired of hurting, but I need to keep going." Her resilience was clear, despite the immense challenges she faced. This message expressed her determination to cherish life despite the significant suffering she faced. Her social media posts often reflected her struggle to stay positive in the midst of her illness, highlighting her hope even when times were tough. Emily was remembered as a kind and caring young woman who made an effort to stay connected with her community. She loved music and sang at the local church whenever her health allowed. Many residents of Langley have fond memories of her performances, but as her health declined, she was able to attend church less often. Despite her challenges, she remained generous and thoughtful, baking with her mother, sharing treats with neighbors. On her good days, she also helped local children with their homework. Laurel, Emily's mother, did everything possible to support her daughter. In a Twitter post, she expressed her feelings, saying, "Emily is back in the hospital, praying to God they can help her. I feel so helpless." These words showed the deep pain and despair she experienced while watching her daughter suffer. Although Laurel was emotionally drained, she was determined not to give up and continuously sought ways to improve Emily's condition. Similarly, Shelley, Randy's sister, could not predict the tragedy that would occur. The family never imagined their lives would be changed in such a devastating manner. Over the past year, Randy often shared with friends the heavy burden and stress he felt due to Emily's illness. No one could have predicted that he would eventually become so emotionally fragile that he would consider harming his family. Randy struggled to manage the emotional strain. Despite their shared despair, the family attempted to support one another, but their situation continued to worsen, leading to an unforeseen and tragic outcome. With the details now revealed, it is obvious that feelings of despair, hidden challenges, and deep hopelessness led to an unexpected tragedy. The story of the Jansen family serves as a sobering reminder that even within seemingly stable homes, deep pain can linger just beneath the surface, occasionally breaking out in unpredictable ways. On a lonely road in Morelos, a young woman's body was found. Bystanders quickly called for emergency help. She was lying still, her skin had noticeable bruises. There were no ID or personal belongings nearby to identify her. Ariadna Lopez was born on July 5, 1995, in a challenging neighborhood in Mexico City. Despite having limited resources, she grew up in a loving environment. Her mother raised her and her older brother, Omar Rodriguez. Their father was mostly absent and had little interest in being involved in their lives. In his absence, Omar took on the role of a protector and role model for Ariadna, creating a strong bond that gave her a sense of security knowing she was supported. Ariadna had a warm and friendly personality, which made her well liked by her friends. She easily connected with others and was known for her honesty, helpfulness. During her school years, she formed close friendships, shared dreams about the future. However, her adulthood was marked by tragedy. In 2018, when Ariadna was only 23, her mother was diagnosed with cancer. The illness progressed quickly, and the family soon faced the heart-wrenching loss. The death of her mother affected both Ariadna and Omar deeply. This experience strengthened their relationship, forced Ariadna to grow up quickly, taking charge of her own life. Before her mother's illness, Ariadna started dating a young man, and their relationship progressed quickly. Soon, she discovered she was pregnant. The birth of their son was a significant turning point, but it did not bring long-term stability to their relationship. They realized early that they were not compatible as a couple and decided to part ways. However, they continued to work together to co-parent their son. As a new mother, Ariadna faced various challenges. She had to juggle parenting with the need to find a stable job. Her journey toward financial independence began when she secured a job at a popular bar in Mexico City that catered to affluent clients. This role came with high expectations regarding professionalism and social skills. At the bar, Ariadna learned to interact effectively with diverse people. Despite the stress of the job, she met its challenges by using her charm and strong work ethic. When the global issue struck, Ariadna's life changed dramatically. The bar where she worked closed, and she lost her job. Instead of feeling defeated, Ariadna viewed this as an opportunity to pursue a long-held dream, opening her own beauty salon. This new venture represented her determination to shape her own life. With her experience and a strong network of contacts, she successfully established a business that provided financial security for herself and her son. During this time, Ariadna began a new relationship with a man she felt a strong connection with. This relationship brought her happiness and a sense of stability. She balanced her responsibilities between her son, her business, and her new partner. Although her days were busy, she welcomed each moment with appreciation, eager for the new opportunities that came her way. By the age of 27, Ariadna's life was like a carefully arranged puzzle. Every success and challenge added to the overall picture of her journey. She had faced loss, rebuilt her life from scratch, focused on her son's future, and achieved her independence. However, just as this chapter of her life seemed to be starting on a positive note, it was unfortunately a precursor to something much more troubling. Ariadna met Vanessa Flores through mutual friends at a social event where Ariadna was with her friends. Vanessa made a strong impression. She was young, energetic, and charismatic, easily attracting attention with everyone around her. However, those close to Vanessa often noted that she could be unpredictable. Behind her charm, there were some more difficult aspects to her personality, and her actions sometimes surprised others. Rodel Astudillo Garcia, a middle-aged entrepreneur, often appeared in Vanessa's social group. His name was frequently associated with rumors due to his wealth, influence, and extravagant lifestyle. He was often seen with younger women who wanted to join his circle. There were many whispers about him, including tales of high-profile connections and even suggestions of links to organized groups. However, no one in his social circle could confirm any of these claims. Rodel himself steered clear of direct questions regarding his past or business dealings. His presence garnered both respect and a sense of unease. Ariadna was smart and independent, but she didn't realize how different her new friends were from her usual social circle. Vanessa, eager to impress, often boasted about her connections to influential people, particularly Rattel, whom she claimed could solve problems effortlessly. Gradually, Ariadna began spending more time with this group. Vanessa seemed genuinely intrigued by Ariadna, lavishing attention on her and diligently trying to earn her trust. When Rattel learned about Ariadna from Vanessa, he quickly wanted to meet her. During their first encounter, he surprised her with his attentiveness and charm. His confidence attracted people, including Ariadna. However, behind his polished facade lay a more complicated character. Those who had interacted with him mentioned his manipulative nature. Despite this, Ariadna perceived him as respectful and even kind. Vanessa played an important role in building the connection. She often invited Ariadna to events where Rattel was also present, fostering a welcoming atmosphere. However, as time went on, small warning signs began to emerge. Ariadna's close friends started advising her to be wary of this group. Some knew about Rattel's dubious reputation and Vanessa's unpredictable behavior. They were concerned that this new social circle might carry hidden dangers. Ariadna dismissed her friends' concerns about her new social circle, viewing her friendship with Vanessa as a refreshing escape from everyday stress. It offered her a chance to experience new things. Meanwhile, Rattel tried to win her over by being generous and friendly, inviting her to dinners and parties that felt fun. Even though Ariadna was in a relationship, she continued to keep her friendships and go to social events. Those who knew her said her partner trusted her and had no issues with her socializing. As time went on, Ariadna noticed some changes in her relationships. Vanessa began to call her more often, suggesting outings and making plans that focused on spending time together. At the same time, Rattel was gradually trying to become a more significant part of her life, presenting himself as someone who could always provide help or support. Unknowingly, Ariadna was getting deeper into their dynamic. On October 30th, 2022, Ariadna accepted Vanessa's invitation to spend the evening with friends. They planned to start at a popular restaurant in downtown Mexico City. Vanessa assured her it would be a relaxed evening filled with good food and enjoyable conversation. Rattel was also expected to join them, which made Ariadna feel slightly uncomfortable. Although she had her reservations about him, she didn't want to disappoint Vanessa, so she decided to go. The group met in the evening at Fisher's, a seafood restaurant, the venue known for its upscale atmosphere and stylish decor, which was lively. At their table, the mood was relaxed. Wine and cocktails were being enjoyed, platters of appetizers added to the festive feel of the night. Rattel took the spotlight, sharing stories, proposing toasts, and engaging playfully with the waitstaff. He exuded confidence and made sure everyone noticed him. Vanessa joined in, lightening the mood with jokes and laughter. The rest of the group attempted to keep the upbeat vibe, but Ariadna stood out because she seemed uncomfortable. She frequently checked her phone, responding to messages and looking concerned as she read the screen. She often glanced at Rattel, as if trying to understand unspoken feelings behind his words. Vanessa tried to draw her back into the fun, urging her to relax and have another drink, but Ariadna remained reserved, her demeanor suggesting that something was troubling her more than the lively atmosphere could hide. In the evening, Ariadna shared a puzzling message on her social media: "Would you miss me if I disappeared?" This caused concern among her followers. Some thought it was just a joke, but her close friends and colleagues felt it was out of character for her. The message created an unsettling feeling that, at the time, no one understood would be connected to her last hours. As the night went on, the group decided to continue their evening at Rattel's house, a suggestion made by Rattel himself. Vanessa supported the idea, claiming it would be a more relaxed and private setting. Although Ariadna felt uncertain, she eventually agreed after her friends pressured her. The rest of the group followed along, and they all traveled together to Rattel's home in his vehicle. His house was situated in an upscale neighborhood that reflected his public persona. Inside, the decor was sleek and modern, featuring luxurious elements. Upon arrival, The group settled into a spacious living room where music played and drinks were served, allowing the night to unfold. However, Ariadna started to feel increasingly uneasy. She stepped away several times to check her phone, pretending to take calls, which made her seem distant and distracted. Vanessa noticed her behavior and began whispering to Roddle, which only added to the tension in the room. Near midnight, Ariadna expressed her desire to go home because she was tired. Vanessa encouraged her to stay a bit longer, just another half hour. Roddle said nothing, but his lingering gaze on Ariadna made her uneasy. As the night came to a close, the guests began to depart, and Ariadna was among the last to leave. After that evening, no one in the group would see her alive again. On October 31st, the night before the Day of the Dead, Ricardo Calderon and a friend set off on a bike ride south from Mexico City to Tepoztlan, a popular day trip destination. They turned off the road to rest outside the colonial town. That's where they made a grisly discovery: a woman's body in the bushes beneath an overpass, within earshot of passing traffic. She was lying on her back, with her arms spread out, her beige skirt pulled up above her waist, and her right foot clad in a white high-top sneaker. Her hair was braided, and she had no identification or belongings. They quickly contacted the police, who arrived several hours later. While waiting, they took photos of the scene to document details that might assist in identifying the woman. When the police arrived, they secured the area, started gathering evidence. They found visible tire tracks in the dirt and markings that indicated the body had been moved. Forensic specialists observed signs of a struggle, but they couldn't determine the exact cause of death right away. No weapons were discovered, and the body had no obvious injuries that could explain what happened. There were also no documents or personal items to identify her. Hours later, images of the scene began to spread on social media, causing widespread concern. Among those who saw the photos were friends and family of Ariadna. Her father and her brother, Omar, recognized familiar features, including her tattoos. The tattoo reads, Armida, the name of Ariadna's mother. Another is a sunflower, her signature symbol. They feared the worst, so they filed a missing person report and informed the authorities that the woman found might be Ariadna Lopez. Meanwhile, authorities in the state of Morelos began a separate investigation. However, the local police's initial actions faced significant criticism. They mishandled evidence collection, leaving many crucial details at the scene undocumented. This raised serious concerns about the professionalism and integrity of the involved law enforcement. When Ariadna's family came to identify the body, they faced their worst fears. Omar recognized his sister by a tattoo on her shoulder. The shock was overwhelming, especially upon seeing the state of her body, which bore bruises and trauma on her face and arms, indicating some form of violence. In contrast, the police's initial statements were vague and unconvincing. The family responded by calling for justice, demanding a transparent investigation. On the same day, they contacted friends who used social media to help raise awareness. The campaign quickly gained traction, attracting thousands of users. Despite increasing public pressure, the Morelos police continued to believe that the death could have been an accident. They indicated that a final conclusion could only be reached after the forensic report was finished. This position only fueled further suspicion, especially as rumors started to spread that influential individuals might be attempting to cover up the truth. Investigators first interviewed Roddle and Vanessa, the last known people to see Ariadna alive. Their statements provided the initial account of the situation. Roddle stated that after the party, Ariadna chose to leave his house and called a taxi. He described her as a little upset but not overly concerned. He said he walked her to the door, and she left alone. Vanessa supported his story, confirming that Ariadna took a taxi but did not mention her destination. However, inconsistencies in their account quickly surfaced. The main issue was the absence of any confirmed taxi records. Neither Roddle nor Vanessa could provide the contact information for a driver or any evidence to back up their claims. Later, investigators checked several taxi service logs in the area but found no record of Ariadna being picked up that night. Another concern was the inconsistency in Vanessa's story. Her answers changed depending on the questions asked. At first, she claimed that Ariadne left the party on her own. Later, she mentioned that they had an argument, implying that Ariadne might have been emotionally troubled. Ariadne's friends reported to the police that Vanessa contacted them after Ariadne's disappearance, trying to suggest that Ariadne was in a bad state of mind, referring to her vague social media post. This post, made just hours before Ariadne's disappearance, raised concerns for many. While her family and close friends initially viewed it as a joke, investigators began to think it might signal her emotional distress on the night of the party. Additionally, Vanessa's increasingly anxious behavior was alarming. In messages to Ariadne's friends, she appeared hesitant to discuss the events of that night. At one point, she expressed fear of being suspected, though she didn't explain why. These clues led investigators to believe that Vanessa might be hiding important information. The initial investigation into Ariadne's death did not provide a clear explanation of what happened. However, further inquiries by law enforcement and independent experts revealed important evidence. 2 autopsies, surveillance footage, and text messages from the suspects' phones became crucial in piecing together the events. Oriel Carmona, the state's chief prosecutor, told reporters that an autopsy determined Ariadne Lopez died of severe alcohol poisoning. He stated that investigators found no signs of violence. Sitting at the same table, Yasmin Herrera Soto, the chief medical examiner, clarified the findings. The autopsy showed significant bruising but no fatal injuries. According to the autopsy report, none of the 17 fresh wounds on Ariadne's arms, legs, and torso broke the skin or caused external bleeding, and there were no broken bones or signs of assault. In an interview, Pereira noted that there were a pair of bruises on the back of Ariadne's head that caused internal bleeding in her skull, but no brain damage, and that the bruising was consistent with a fall. The cuts on Lopez's forehead were believed to have been caused by insects attacking her while her body was outside. Prosecutors stated that lab tests showed Ariadne's blood alcohol level was 0.498, a level that is 6 times the legal limit for driving in the United States. According to Carmona, Ariadne choked on her own vomit. Nevertheless, her family strongly disputed this finding. Ariadne's family, unsatisfied with the official explanation, requested an independent second autopsy. Under pressure from the public and her relatives, Ariadne's body was sent to a forensic institute in Mexico City. The results of this second examination contradicted the original conclusions. Experts discovered multiple injuries, including head trauma, bruises, and signs of struggle on her arms and legs, suggesting she may have tried to defend herself. These findings indicated that Ariadne's death was not accidental or solely due to alcohol. Consequently, her death was reclassified as the result of violent actions, leading authorities to treat the case as a criminal matter. Security footage from Roddle's apartment building provided crucial evidence in the case. One video shows Roddle early the morning after the party. A bald, bearded man dragged Ariadne Lopez's body, his legs stiff from rigor mortis, through the hallway and down to the garage. He carried the corpse over his right shoulder to the back of a black SUV, then hurried to the driver's seat. Mexico City Mayor Claudia Sheinbaum identified the man as Roddle Astudillo and accused him of driving the body and dumping it near Tepoztlan, a charge prosecutors later said was substantiated based on analysis of his cell phone records. Sheinbaum said Astudillo likely chose to dump the body in neighboring Morelos state because of his relationship with Carmona, the prosecutor she accused of covering up the case. Sheinbaum said that they had tried to blame the victim. He added that never again should a woman's murder be covered up and a woman be defamed and harmed. Meanwhile, Vanessa often told Ariadne's friends that she might have been having emotional difficulties and suggested she could have intentionally disappeared. However, her friends described Ariadne as lively and optimistic, with no known emotional issues. When the second autopsy and surveillance footage, it became evident that the initial theories of an accidental death or voluntary departure from Roddle's home were not valid. The evidence instead indicated a violent act and a conscious attempt to conceal the body. These findings led to legal actions against Roddle and Vanessa, who would soon face charges in court. Vanessa was the first to be arrested. Authorities discovered that she had been in regular contact with Roddle after Ariadne's death, discussing ways to evade legal consequences. Her arrest occurred amid significant media attention. During initial questioning, Vanessa claimed she was not involved in Ariadne's death, but her statements contained numerous contradictions. She asserted that she had gone to bed early on the night of the incident and knew nothing about what happened afterward. However, further investigations disproved this claim. Message logs indicated that she was aware of the situation and had conversed with Roddle about important details. Investigators also found that Vanessa had taken actions to destroy potential evidence, including deleting photos and conversations, trying to distance herself from the aftermath. Realizing the overwhelming evidence against him, Roddle chose to turn himself in. He arrived at the police station with his legal team and claimed he was innocent. He stated that he did not harm Ariadne. Instead, he panicked after finding her unresponsive in his home the morning after the party and attempted to conceal her body, fearing he would be blamed. However, investigators found significant issues with his version of events. First, a second autopsy revealed clear signs of physical trauma, contradicting his assertion that she died without any interference. Second, surveillance footage showed him intentionally carrying her body in a way that suggested he was trying to avoid being seen, which is not typical behavior for someone seeking help. Furthermore, his text messages with Vanessa indicated that they had coordinated their stories and worked to mislead others about what actually happened. During the investigation, alarming new evidence came to light pointing to possible corruption. There were increasing suspicions about a link between Roddle and a prosecutor in Morelos. Notably, the initial autopsy report from that state failed to mention any injuries that suggested violence. Public activists and Ariadne's family accused the prosecutor of abusing their position to protect Roddle, leading to widespread public anger. In response, authorities in Mexico City began a formal review of the prosecutor's actions, while Internal Affairs launched an independent investigation into potential misconduct. Some witnesses alleged that Roddle had ties to criminal groups, which could explain his seeming assurance that he would escape punishment. Nevertheless, both Vanessa and Roddle denied any direct involvement, instead choosing to defend each other, deflect questions. This evasiveness heightened investigators' suspicions and played a significant role in the decision to keep them in temporary custody. The reasons and events of that night prompted a thorough investigation. To find the truth, investigators had to piece together the timeline, analyze physical evidence, and study the actions of everyone at the gathering. Gradually, a clearer understanding started to take shape. Ariadne Lopez arrived at Fisher's, a bustling seafood restaurant in Mexico City, at around 6 p.m. on October 30th, wearing a long beige dress and white high-top sneakers. She hugged both Vanessa and Roddle. The trio, along with 3 others, left the restaurant about an hour later in Roddle's black SUV. All 6 arrived at Roddle's building at around 7:15 p.m. They took the elevator to his apartment. At first glance, everything seemed typical. There was laughter, conversation, and music, but subtle hints indicated something was off. Witnesses and text message analysis showed that Ariadne was unusually quiet and distracted. She often checked her phone, sending messages and answering calls, behavior her friends noted was unlike her during social events. This detail became important in the investigation. Ariadne's messages to a friend revealed her worries about the gathering and discomfort with certain people there. Although Vanessa and Rotel were the hosts, there was noticeable tension between them. Witnesses later noted that Vanessa directed several sharp comments at Ariadne throughout the night. Ariadne, wishing to avoid drama, responded calmly and tried to defuse any potential conflict. As the night progressed and alcohol began to affect everyone, tensions intensified. Vanessa, already emotional, raised her voice multiple times, accusing Ariadne of being disrespectful and unfriendly. No one else at the gathering agreed with these accusations, but the atmosphere became increasingly tense. While Roddle tried to stay neutral, it was evident that he felt uncomfortable with Vanessa's actions. The turning point occurred the next morning. Witnesses reported seeing Ariadne heading toward the exit, apparently trying to leave the house, but for unknown reasons, she returned shortly after. It is thought that Vanessa confronted her again at that time, escalating their argument. Investigators believe jealousy was at the heart of their conflict, as Vanessa accused Ariadna of attracting too much attention from Roddle. Messages found on phones showed that Vanessa and Roddle later discussed the tense moments from that night. Within about half an hour, 3 of the 6 had left, leaving only Roddle, Vanessa, and Ariadna inside. The case file indicates that Vanessa, influenced by alcohol, became increasingly aggressive. At some point, investigators think an altercation took place, resulting in the fatal injuries Ariadna sustained. Why did Ariadna share such an unusual message on social media that night? Initially, many assumed it was a joke, but her close friends later confirmed that she was likely feeling uneasy because of Vanessa's behavior and the tense vibe at the gathering. The post might have been her way of expressing her discomfort or reaching out for help. As pieced together the events, it became clear that Vanessa's jealousy, heightened by alcohol and her emotional instability, significantly contributed to what transpired. Instead of seeking assistance, Roddle appeared to prioritize hiding what happened, which ultimately made the situation worse. Ariadna's family has worked hard to reveal the full truth about her death. They organized protests, created social media campaigns, and made sure the public remained focused on the case. One major success was attracting international media attention, which increased pressure on Mexico's judicial system to be transparent. In late November, hundreds of people participated in a protest march in Mexico City. The preliminary court proceedings in Ariadna's case were a key moment in their quest for justice. Despite facing some resistance from authorities, her family and their legal team ensured that the case was handled openly and fairly, with all details thoroughly examined. The public and the media closely followed every step of the investigation and court process, minimizing the chances for cover-ups or misinformation. The legal process centered on the actions of Roddle and Vanessa. During the hearings, prosecutors presented strong evidence, including surveillance videos, audio recordings, and text messages from their phones. This evidence suggested not only that they helped hide Ariadna's body but also that they might have been involved in aggressive behavior leading up to her death. The defense claimed it was all a tragic accident, but the extensive witness testimonies and forensic findings raised significant doubts about that explanation. A key part of the trial was uncovering the motive behind the crime. Witnesses who knew Vanessa described her as emotionally unstable and prone to outbursts, especially when drinking. Roddle was depicted as having a questionable past with possible connections to criminal groups, which further complicated his role that night. Although both defendants denied any responsibility for Ariadna's death, their statements often conflicted with established facts, increasing suspicions against them. At this time, the final verdict has not yet been reached, and the investigation is still ongoing. However, prosecutors have charged the suspects with homicide, which may be categorized as femicide, a crime motivated by gender-based violence. In Mexico, this classification is seen as an aggravating circumstance and could result in a maximum penalty of up to 70 years in prison if both suspects are convicted. In January 2023, after reviewing conflicting autopsy results and other evidence, Mexico's Federal Attorney General's office sided with Mexico City prosecutors. The Attorney General stated that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, resulting from a blunt instrument or contact with a flat, hard surface. The coroner's conclusion that Ariadna's death was related to excessive drinking was deemed unacceptable by the Attorney General. Investigators determined that she died in Roddle's apartment on the evening of October 30th, between 10 p.m. and 1 a.m., but they did not provide details regarding a possible motive. Morelos prosecutor, Carmona, denied any wrongdoing. He described the work of his forensic detectives as impeccable and dismissed the Attorney General's findings as mere opinion. Mexico City authorities increased security for the Lopez family to mitigate fears of retaliation by Roddle's accomplices. Ariadna's 7-year-old son is now living with her older brother, Omar. As the closest male role model, he has assumed the responsibilities of both guardian and father. Omar is fully committed to meeting the child's needs while also honoring his sister's memory by providing the love and stability that Ariadna once offered. The rest of the family has rallied around him, determined to help the boy cope with his loss and ensure that he grows up in a nurturing environment. Ariadna Lopez became a symbol of the fight for equality as women marched in the streets on Women's Day with her image on signs. Sweet, tender feelings can quickly turn into frustration, disappointment, even outright hatred. In those cases, the most reasonable thing to do is end the relationship. When large sums of money and the temptation of quick riches are involved, the life of a person can be at risk. Gary Bentley's situation is not unusual. There have been cases where people have been harmed over much less. In this case, however, the killer was motivated by the prospect of gaining $1 million and achieving a life of comfort. Did Gary suspect that something terrible might happen? His parents believe he did. They had a bad feeling about his situation and were worried for his safety, trying to protect him. However, Gary couldn't believe that the love of his life, the mother of his child, could actually commit murder. He fought hard to salvage his failing marriage for the sake of his son, but ultimately, he lost his life, leaving the boy an orphan, even though his mother was still alive. Gary Wayne Bentley was born on August 31, 1984, in Louisville, Jefferson County, Kentucky. He was the youngest of 2 children in the Bentley family, with an older sister named Amy. From a young age, Gary and Amy shared a close and trusting bond. The Bentley family operated their own farm and worked diligently to provide for their children, ensuring they received a quality education. The children actively participated in the farm work, contributing to the family's efforts. Overall, the Bentley family was close-knit, offering each other care and support. From a young age, Gary was very close to his dad, Gerald. They enjoyed spending time together, often going fishing, hunting, and camping. Gerald taught Gary important skills, including how to handle a gun, navigate the wilderness, identify edible mushrooms and berries. As a teenager, Gary became seriously interested in firearms, learning to use them proficiently and eventually starting a collection. Almost every weekend, he and his dad would go hunting or fishing together, solidifying their bond as best friends. Those who knew him described him as kind, easygoing, always ready to help others. He excelled in school, avoided negative influences, maintained good habits, and never encountered legal trouble. Gary was a quiet and home-loving young man who prioritized his family. After high school, Gary attended college in Frankfurt, the state capital, where he studied engineering. Upon graduating, he returned to his hometown of Louisville and began his career as a basic electrician, rapidly advancing in his profession. In college, Gary met Tasha, who became the love of his life. She was about 1.5 years older than him, but that age difference didn't matter to them. They began dating soon after meeting, and in 2006, they moved in together near Gary's parents' home. Tasha was studying nursing. After earning her degree, she got a job at a city hospital, where she quickly gained the respect and admiration of her colleagues. However, she didn't stop there. She continued her education and worked hard to advance her career. In 2012, Gary and Tasha celebrated their love with a large wedding, inviting all their family and friends. Shortly after, Tasha became pregnant. They was filled with joy. In the spring of 2013, they welcomed their baby boy, Connor. By this time, both Gary and Tasha were successful in their careers, earning good money. This allowed them to move into a larger, more comfortable home, buy 2 cars, travel, and enjoy life without financial worries. Gary dreamed of having a big family and wanted at least 2 more children with Tasha. However, just a few years later, their happiness began to fade. The first 4 years of their marriage were ideal. Others admired them as a perfect couple. They held respected, well-paying jobs, were wonderful parents, good friends. They frequently hosted parties at their home for family and close friends, were always eager to assist anyone in need. Gary's parents, Gerald and Lisa, were thrilled with their daughter-in-law and grandson. In 2016, the Bentley marriage began to face significant challenges. Their relationship started to suffer when Tasha encountered unexpected difficulties at work. She frequently expressed frustration about her co-workers, her boss, and the difficult working environment. Gary tried to support her, but he cautioned her against quitting her job too hastily, as finding another position with a decent salary would be challenging. In the fall of 2016, they wanted to reduce stress, so they decided to go on vacation. They left their son with Gary's parents and flew to a resort in Jamaica with their close friends, Amy Day and Kevin. The first few days were wonderful. They enjoyed the beach, explored the island, and had a great time together. However, Tasha appeared distracted. She constantly texted someone, became defensive when anyone asked about it. As the trip continued, arguments between Gary and Tasha grew more frequent. Their friends noticed that the fight seemed to start unexpectedly and quickly escalated, making Amy and Kevin feel uncomfortable. Soon after returning home from vacation, Tasha informed Gary that she had quit her job. Gary was concerned about her decision, as losing a stable income could negatively impact their family finances. However, being responsible and frugal, he had some savings that would help them maintain their lifestyle until Tasha found another job. Remarkably, just a day after quitting, Tasha was offered a consulting position at a large pharmaceutical company. This left Gary puzzled since she had not mentioned searching for a job prior to resigning. It seemed possible that someone had assisted her in securing this position, but Tasha dismissed it as luck, insisting that she had stumbled upon the interview by chance. Tasha appeared to be content with her new job, but her home life took a turn for the worse. She was often absent, stopped cooking, neglected household chores, and seemed uninterested in Gary's life. Most concerning was her lack of attention to their son, leaving much of the parenting responsibilities to his grandparents on weekends. Mrs. Bentley began traveling frequently, citing work trips as the reason. She was often on her phone, searching for private places to talk, and when questioned, she maintained that her calls were work-related, needing to discuss things with colleagues or bosses. Additionally, she added a password to her phone, something she had never done before, to keep it private. Her behavior became increasingly secretive and detached. Gary dedicated himself to their son, giving him all his love and attention. He lived for the boy, spending his free time with him and doing everything he could to make sure Connor felt loved, despite the ongoing arguments and Tasha's lack of concern. Gary still loved Tasha and wished to salvage their marriage, primarily for their son's benefit. Noticing the increasing tension in their son's family, Gary's parents decided to surprise him, Tasha, and their grandson with a trip to a beautiful resort in Mexico. They selected a cozy hotel in a quiet area, hoping it would create a peaceful setting for the family to reconnect and spend quality time together. The hotel had limited cell service, the internet was weak and frequently disconnected, encouraging the family to enjoy each other's company, relax on the beach, and take long walks. However, Tasha became increasingly frustrated by the lack of connectivity. She often attempted to make phone calls or find a signal to send messages, which led her to lash out at Gary and his parents, even yelling at their young son. Gerald, Gary's dad, noticed that Gary's behavior was unusual and felt it was time for an open conversation. He expressed his concern that Tasha might be unfaithful. Gary tried to brush it off with humor, but Gerald could see in his eyes that he shared the same worries while trying to act as if everything was okay. The couple fought daily, with Tasha insisting they cut their vacation short to address urgent work issues. Eventually, she packed her things and declared she would fly home alone. This forced the rest of the family to leave early with her, even though they had already paid for another week at the hotel and wouldn't receive any refunds. In the spring of 2017, Tasha called her father-in-law, Gerald, sounding upset. She told him that her car had caught fire at a gas station and was completely destroyed. She needed a ride to her insurance company and then back home. Gerald hurried to help her, but he felt uneasy about the situation. This was the third time since Tasha had been with Gary that one of her cars had mysteriously burned. Each time it happened at a gas station, leaving the vehicle in ruins and making it hard to find out the real cause of the fire. Each incident was blamed on faulty equipment at the gas station, and Tasha always received large insurance payouts. These fires seemed to occur approximately every 3 years, and Tasha would insure her cars for the maximum amount just before the fires, using different insurance companies each time. She claimed she didn't know how the fires happened. Some friends and family suspected she might have enemies sabotaging her cars. Nevertheless, After each incident, Tasha bought a newer, more expensive car, and the insurance companies had no valid reason to deny her claims, despite the suspicious pattern of the fires making it nearly impossible to prove deliberate damage. By the summer of 2017, Tasha began to disappear almost every weekend, claiming these absences were due to work trips. She became increasingly distant from Gary and their son, as if she were living a separate life. Friends, family, and even their neighbors started to suspect that Tasha was having an affair. These rumors deeply affected Gary. He stopped making jokes about the situation and would either remain silent or change the topic. Gary's parents tried multiple times to discuss this with him, emphasizing that things couldn't go on like this because their marriage seemed to be falling apart. However, Gary consistently insisted that he still loved Tasha, was determined to keep the family together for Connor's sake. He clung to the hope that Tasha would realize her mistakes, rethink her priorities, and that their life would return to how it used to be. In November 2017, Gary, Tasha, and their son visited his parents' house for Thanksgiving. Gary's sister Amy was there with her family too. When it was time to exchange gifts, Tasha revealed that she hadn't brought any. She explained that work had kept her too busy, promising to go out and buy some gifts quickly. However, she was gone for hours and returned without anything, not even a gift for her son. When everyone looked at her quizzically, she explained that the lines at the stores were too long and it would have taken her all night to wait. This time, Amy couldn't hold back. She pulled Gary aside, asked him point blank if he realized that Tasha was probably seeing someone else and wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Gary simply responded that they would handle it themselves. The following weekend, Gary called his dad, asked him to come over with some tools. Gerald was glad to help and arrived at his son's house within half an hour with everything he needed. As mentioned earlier, Gary had been collecting guns since he was young, and his house was filled with pistols, hunting rifles, shotguns, and more. He even had some rare items placed in different rooms. Recently, Gary decided to install a safe to store all his firearms securely. This sudden decision made Gerald a bit anxious, so he asked Gary why he wanted to hide his gun collection. Gary didn't provide a clear answer, but Gerald sensed that his son was afraid of something, and it didn't seem to be concerns about burglars. Later, when Tasha got home, she revealed that it was her idea to get the safe because she was scared and felt they might be in danger. Although her comments seemed odd at the time, Gerald didn't think much of it. On Sunday, December 10, 2017, Tasha called Gerald. She said she couldn't reach Gary all day. When she got home, the garage door was open. Fearing a burglary, she was too scared to enter the house and asked Gerald to come over. At this time, Connor was safe with his grandparents, leaving Gary home alone. Gerald quickly rushed to the house. At first, everything seemed normal. The garage door was slightly open. Inside, nothing looked out of place, nothing was missing, and there were no signs of an intruder. Gerald called for his son multiple times, but received no answer. When he entered the bedroom, he discovered Gary's lifeless body on the bed. Shocked, Gerald attempted CPR but quickly realized Gary's body was cold and showed signs of rigor mortis. He immediately called 911, still in disbelief that his son was gone. Later, he noticed that the gun safe in the bedroom had been tampered with, and some firearms were missing. When the forensic team arrived, they found that Gary had been killed by a single close-range gunshot to the head. He was lying on his side in bed as if he were asleep, showing no other injuries or signs of a struggle. This suggests he was likely asleep when the killer approached. The crime did not resemble a typical robbery. Valuables, including a jewelry box and cash left out in the open, were untouched. This indicated that the gun safe was the main target. However, only a few guns were stolen, and none were particularly valuable. Neither the stolen guns nor those left behind were the weapon used for the murder. From the beginning of the investigation, Tasha, Gary's wife, was the main suspect. Firstly, she did not act like someone who was grieving. She spoke calmly with the detectives and detailed the events of the day when she and her father-in-law discovered Gary's body. Secondly, friends and family indicated that Gary and Tasha's relationship had been struggling for some time, that a divorce seemed imminent. Thirdly, the Bentleys had two large dogs that typically barked at anyone except their owners. However, neighbors reported they did not hear any barking, and Gary would likely have woken up if he had. Tasha stated that Gary had planned to go hunting that day and that she had left the house to run errands. She mentioned trying to call him after lunch but couldn't get through, attributing it to poor reception. On her way back, she stopped at a friend's house, a detail confirmed by her friends during questioning. There were no witnesses to the crime, no one heard anything unusual or saw any unfamiliar faces that day. Even the surveillance footage from nearby cameras provided no valuable information. It seems that the crime was a meticulously planned event, which was poorly disguised as a robbery. One day, Tasha received a call from Amy Day, who wanted to express condolences and offer help with the funeral arrangements. Tasha's reply shocked Amy. She stated that Gary's parents were in charge of the funeral because she had more crucial matters to attend to. Those crucial matters turned out to be a visit to the insurance company to claim a large payout. Shortly before the murder, Tasha persuaded Gary to take out a $1 million life insurance policy. Although Gary was reluctant, he agreed to please his wife. A few days prior to the crime, Tasha attempted to raise the payout to $2 million but was unsuccessful. This created a clear motive, but there was still no solid evidence connecting Tasha to the murder. Additionally, it was revealed that Tasha had 3 previous cars that mysteriously burned out, each resulting in significant insurance payouts. This suggested that she might have engaged in similar insurance scams in the past. One of Tasha's friends mentioned that she had been in a relationship with a coworker named Anthony for over a year, and he had assisted her in finding a new job. Investigators decided to interrogate Anthony, suspecting he might have played a role in the crime. Anthony acknowledged that he had been in a romantic relationship with Tasha for a long time and shared that they frequently met at his home. He mentioned that Tasha intended to leave Gary and that they had plans to celebrate New Year's Eve 2018 together. As soon as Anthony found out that he was being viewed as a suspect in the murder investigation, he quickly tried to establish an alibi. He said that on the day of the murder, he was at his parents' house assisting them with renovations. They made multiple trips to thrift stores that day, and these trips were recorded on surveillance cameras. Detectives determined that Tasha probably acted alone, which accounted for the absence of forced entry and the dogs not barking. However, the murder weapon and the stolen guns from the safe were still unexplained. Tasha's account of the events was inconsistent, as she continually altered it by adding new information, occasionally attempting to shift blame onto others. She mentioned the disagreement between Gary and Kevin during their vacation. Tasha suggested that Kevin might have held a grudge and seized this chance for revenge. The trial for Gary's murder began in July 2021. The prosecution argued that Tasha's main motive for the crime was financial gain. She aimed to collect a $1 million insurance payout and planned to use part of that money to renovate Anthony's house, where she hoped to move soon. After a few hours of questioning, Tasha finally admitted to killing her husband but placed the blame on Gary. She alleged that Gary was abusive to both her and their son, claimed that the day of the murder, he had hit their child again. Tasha said this was the breaking point for her. When Gary fell asleep, she took a gun. However, her accusations were not supported by anyone. Her friends and family all defended Gary, describing him as a loving husband and caring father. They insisted he would never harm Tasha or their young son, whom he cherished. Even their child confirmed that his father had never hurt him or his mother. Tasha eventually disclosed the location where she had hidden the guns she took from the safe, including the murder weapon, a pistol. Notably, the pistol had Anthony's fingerprints on it. Tasha had given the gun to her lover to keep, which resulted in his fingerprints being left on it. Her intention was to frame him if things did not go as planned, but she confessed before she could execute that part of her scheme. On July 20, 2021, Tasha Bentley was found guilty of premeditated murder and attempting to obstruct the investigation. She was sentenced to 55 years in prison, with the possibility of parole not before 2037. She is serving her sentence at the Kentucky Correctional Institution for Women. Little Connor lost both his parents in a tragic incident and is now being raised by his paternal grandparents. This case was highlighted in an episode of Investigation Discovery called American Monster.